The ideology of whiteness is the norm that needs to be eradicated. So why does she want to be here at all? What would be the point?
Because it's what we said before, that woke mentality is inherently expansionist.
Yes.
This is CRT, critical race theory.
100%. If we can get to the next link, this is if you can zoom in on this, please, John. The Smithsonian did us a nice graphic that described whiteness, because most people, when they say white supremacy, you're thinking of men in white hoods who are burning crosses. That's not what they're talking about. When they say white supremacy, they are talking, if you look at this, they're just describing English culture, actually. Just aesthetics based on European culture, steak and potatoes, food, bland at best, justice, time, Christianity, history based on Northern European immigrants' experience, this heavy focus on the British Empire.
Basically, you're guilty. The default position is you're guilty, and you have to atone for your guilthood.
Sure, but this is meant to be what they consider to be a value-free description, right? Individualism. If you can scroll down to the bottom, John, and I think the most revealing one here is communication. The King's English. Right. So that's the communication of whiteness, is it? The King's English.
Why would that be white supremacist?
No, that's the thing. This isn't about supremacy. They say this is the white culture, right? And so when they say white culture, what they're saying is English culture.
They say be polite.
Yes.
Such a bad thing to be polite.
Yes, but the thing is, people read this in wrong ways, because of the way that they frame this, they call this white. But this, of course, is not universal to white people. People in France are white, but they don't have the King's English in France or in Germany or in Poland or where in the Netherlands. This is obviously talking about the particular Anglo culture of the United States, and of course that's what Scholler is appealing to in England, obviously. Again, be polite. Is that really a Spanish axiom? Is it really, don't show emotion, say the Italians, and so the problem that the Americans have is they call Englishness whiteness, and because it's got a universal property, white, they ascribe the habits of the English to people with white skin, and so it makes it sound like only white people are polite, or only white people are competitive or care about justice. Justice based on English common law. So we know that they're not talking about the French or the Germans or anyone else. English common law is surprisingly something particular to England. And so the fact that it's called white is the sleight of hand that they use. What they mean is English culture. So when Scholler is saying, well, this is a white supremacist country, what they're saying is an English country that has English common law, communicates in English, cares about all of the same sort of particulars that English culture approves of. And notice, as soon as we say that, when she says, let's eradicate the problem of whiteness, well, this is what she means. She doesn't mean racists in KKK hoods beating or lynching black people. That's not what she's talking about.
Eradicate the culture.
Exactly. Destroy the culture of being polite, speaking English, having justice based on English common law. That's white supremacy to her. And so this is quite a tiring job, as you can imagine. As she says in this interview, it's not the job of black people and ethnic minorities to educate white people on racism perpetuated by white people. White folks need to educate themselves on racism. Really. Because racism, of course, is preferring the English culture of England over the non-English cultures of foreign parts. That's all that is. That's what she's saying. And this is the form of discrimination. And so, I think the reason that Scholler, in particular, what she said here is she's saying that it's the English person's job to eradicate Englishness in England. That's the summary of what she said here. And how is that not colonization?
Because they try to get English people do it.
Right. But she's also not English from abroad, and she's here promoting this. So it would be like if the British Empire had gone to India and started trying to eradicate the native Indian cultures.
Yeah, it's spreading division.
Yes.
Yeah, but the effect is the same.
Exactly, the effect is the same. And interestingly, like her criticism of Queen Elizabeth being a colonizer, there's another royal colonizer around, isn't there? But anyway, the reason that people hate Dr. Shola is that she is strident and divisive and impolite and seems to hate everything about this country and the people within it. And so someone had apparently sent her a threat. Now, I'm just going to take it as read that someone did this to her and that she didn't do this to herself. I've got no evidence that she has written this and posted it through her own door and is using this as a way of creating a great deal of sympathetic media interest. I've got no evidence at all that that's the case. And so we're just going to believe that this prescribed terrorist group has done this to her. And I'm sure the British authorities will be investigating this. They'll check all the CCTV cameras, they'll find the culprit, and they will give them the punishment they justly deserve. Because of course you should never threaten anyone, at all, and there's no excuse for it, frankly. This is a few extracts, a lot of it we can't read on YouTube, but there are a few extracts here that I think are worth pointing out. This is the National Action London cell. Hard to believe they'd have a London cell. We are watching you. Shola, you are a constant troublemaker and liar who appears on television frequently. You make a shabby living from criticizing and race grifting against ethnic white Europeans in our culture. We have placed you on our kill list and intend to kill you, your children and your husband. You've gone too far and now it's time for you to pay the price. This is a serious notice from National Action London. We are notifying you of our intention to kill you and your family. Is that normally how threats sound?
Are you kidding me? How much drill do you have dripping down your mouth if you believe that's true? It sounds like a bunch of
I mean, I'm not an expert, but whatever.
I've trouble believing that anyone writes that way.
It's like, anticipate trouble.
I mean, the thing is, it's kind of written like someone who wrote this wasn't their first language. English wasn't their first language. Like, I really find it hard to believe that someone who was raised in an English school without the formal rules and structure of English being taught to them would write in this way. I just find it really hard. But this is, of course, typical Nazis who have posted this. But of course, then Shola does another round of media interview. Oh, look, I am a terrible victim here. And this is what she said.
I'm going to speak right now.
Dr. Shola is a political activist and regular commentator on Good Morning Britain. The letter she received on Monday is littered with racial slurs and direct references to Dr. Shola's campaigning.
It's because people like me are speaking the truth in fighting white supremacy.
Dr. Shola believes the tone of British politics around institutional racism and immigration have re-energized far-right beliefs.
Using words like invasion to asylum seekers and refugees, especially those who come from ethnic minority backgrounds. It speaks directly to how British ethnic minorities are also treated because, Black British people, Asian British people are treated like that in this country. It almost seems to me like we are meant.
That word makes zero sense whatsoever. Asian British? Are you kidding me? Do you have any common sense at all? I mean, did you get taught anything in school? Come on.
To be grateful.
Why should you be grateful to be in Britain? The evil, racist, Nazi, white supremacist country that you need to completely change. But you can see just from that news footage, the bit of her on Good Morning Britain being unbelievably strident. Like she's winning very few friends outside of the circle of people who are very sympathetic to this. But she says, if you go to the next week, I'm not going to be silenced. They want to silence voices like mine. It's not going to happen. And when she says people like me, I always find that really interesting. How many princesses in exile can there possibly be in Britain at the moment? There can't be many. Like the constituency she represents must be vanishingly small. Almost one or two people.
I don't know about the death threats, but I think what is particularly problematic is that she is trying to portray, at least the way I see it, the majority of the
most
people
immigrants
as those who would write this letter.
Yes. And the
Yes.
majority of English people would write the letter, and the majority of immigrants receive letters like that.
Yeah.
Do you ever receive letters like that?
No.
You're an immigrant from Greece. You don't get letters like that?
No.
God, I don't know what to tell you. Anyway, she did another interview. Of course, she keeps doing these interviews. You can see that she's deeply emotional by this. I'm not leaving society. Sorry, no, right. So there's an exact quote from this. I'm not leaving this society to people like this. Not our society, not my society. This society. As if she frames it as if she is external to the society and she is examining it as an onlooker. That's how she frames everything. Okay, fair enough. But she tells us that she actually loves Britain, you know. Big fan of Britain is Dr. Scholler. You wouldn't have guessed by everything we've seen so far, but let's play the next clip.
I am not the problem here. You are. This country, the United Kingdom, we love so much, and the greatness you believe this country has was created, added to, expanded on by people like me and the ancestors of people like me. We belong here.
The royal family of Nigeria belongs in Britain, you see.
And
What do you think of that?
I don't know. I don't like people who are trying to demonize the population of most countries, and I don't particularly like.
She's insufferable, isn't she?
Yeah.
But then it's okay to say because she is insufferable and she knows it. But what I find interesting is when she says in that clip, you know, this country we love. It's like, again, not our country or my country. You know, she speaks of it like from an external perspective. And her face is kind of cold when she said it, but as soon as she starts talking about the immigrants, the foreigners, her face warms, goes down, all the things that and it's just very interesting.
I don't understand why she wants to identify as British if she thinks that British culture is all the bad things she described it to be.
Great question.
As if being British is something that has no content for her mind. And she says being British is something that I'm going to say what it is.
Yes.
Has nothing to do with the way the
Yes.
concept arose historically. And basically it means nothing.
Yeah.
She's
And the-
just throwing the term like that.
And the
Yeah.
indigenous British people have got no claim to it. You know,
Yeah.
actually, an exiled Nigerian princess has a claim to it.
And there's a question as to if you hate a culture, why are you still there?
I mean, I would suggest that it's because everything she's saying is a lie.
Yes.
And actually, we've got this kind of external fetishism of foreigners and foreign cultures, and we actually kind of oikophobically hate our own culture. That's what I would suggest. But anyway, the main point that she's getting to is that actually, if you can believe it, this is all an attempt to control your speech.
Guardian.
You know what you're not allowed to call her? A race grifter. Let's play.
them saying that racism doesn't exist, it's all in your mind. Them being allowed to use words like race baiter, race grifter against voices like mine. I'm not the only one that receives threats like this online or offline.
There we go. You're not allowed to call her a race baiter or a race grifter. Her entire career is built on race baiting and race grifting.
Yeah.
But I mean, if you call it, then
This ties well, I think, with what we were talking about in the previous segment. She wants to portray the majority of the population as such.
yes.
Yeah.
She thinks that the national action represents the regular British person. But then I suppose that, like, if your attack on Britain and Englishness is so broad as to say Britain is bad, Britain is a white nationalist country, Britain is evil, Britain is the KKK, then I mean, maybe a lot of people would say, well, piss off then.
Yeah.
But anyway, the point, though, is that a lot of people just tend to put together the dots. Here's just someone who replied to a comment on Twitter. Shola says that white people have white privilege regardless of class, means, education. White privilege is white supremacy personified. White supremacy needs to be wiped from the face of the earth. Conclusion, she would have white people eradicated. Well, I mean, how's the...
And she would have Britain eradicated.
Yes.
And then call herself British.
Yeah. And then she would call herself British. Yeah. I mean, that's what people take away from Dr. Shola's activism. Whether rightly or wrongly, it's how she communicates to them. And I was so British. Yeah. I mean, white people tend to put together the dots. Here's just someone who replied to a comment on Twitter. Shola says that white people have white privilege regardless of class, means, education. White privilege is white supremacy personified. White supremacy needs to be wiped from the face of the earth. Conclusion, she would have white people eradicated. Well, I mean, how's the...
And she would have Britain eradicated.
Yes.
And then call herself British.
Yeah. And then she would call herself British. Yeah, I mean, that's what people take away from Dr. Shola's activism. Whether rightly or wrongly, it's how she communicates to them. And I'm just not very sympathetic, frankly. But of course, what career could she have in, say, Nigeria, doing what she does here? The Nigerians aren't going to want to hear about how evil the British are all day, every day, but a bunch of left-wing Westminster commentariat, oh, they love it, don't they? But anyway, we'll leave that there. Sorry if I offended you, Your Highness. I'm just trying to figure out what it is you actually want from us.
Another Golden Age blueprint for interplanetary orbital sails. So rarely poetry. Recording data is easy, but recording data that can only be opened by those you allow to, now that is an art form.
Of the strange research to come out of mid-1900s America, there is little with a legacy as enduring or as terrifying as the Mouse Utopia experiments. Taking place throughout the 50s, 60s, and early 70s, the grim fate of the subjects was published in the national magazine Scientific American, and the experiments themselves were largely taken as apocalyptic portents. In a post-war United States, the language used to describe the results, such as behavior sync, became synonymous with fears of an overpopulated world and violent, deviant behavior in cities. Today, they are preserved within fiction, such as Channel 4's conspiracy thriller Utopia and the classic animated movie The Secret of Nim.
Our world began changing.
So what were the Mouse Utopia experiments? Shortly after World War II, a group known collectively as the Environmentalists were making a large push to prevent environmental degradation, as well as overexploitation of the planet's renewable resources. Among these people were a group specifically known as the Neo-Malthusians, a term referring to the 18th and 19th century English scholar Thomas Robert Malthus. Malthus proposed that while the world's population may increase exponentially, food production can only increase linearly, leading to an eventual subsistence-level existence for the human race that became known as a Malthusian catastrophe. While advancements such as the Green Revolution saw that this didn't come about, the Neo-Malthusians acknowledged his concerns about overpopulation and feared that this pattern would result in the collapse of civilization or, at best, have extreme adverse effects. These fears were given a platform in writing of the time, especially in works such as William Folkt's Road to Survival in 1948, and perhaps most famously, Silent Spring by Rachel Carson in 1962. Before the movement's explosion of popularity in the 50s and 60s, however, researchers had already begun work investigating the effects of population growth, and among them was a man named John B. Calhoun. Born in 1917, Calhoun took an early interest in science, specifically ornithology, publishing his first paper on birds when he was 15, but over time, his interest would change. By the time he received his PhD, his focus had turned to ethology, the study of animal behavior. When his education was concluded, he moved with his family to Towson, Maryland.
Delivery on 30?
Yeah, sign in.
Sure, you mind.
Speaking of Anglophobia, let's talk about Nish Kumar. Do you know who Nish Kumar is?
He's the guy who got bread thrown at him for being unfunny.
He is. That's
Yeah.
exactly right. He went and did a comedy show for, I can't remember who it was for. It wasn't for the usual sort of woke left-wing London crowd, though. And he started trying to, like, roll out his
This video was made possible by Shortform. The next step.
Because he could not in good... This content is made possible by individuals like you. Become a supporting member and access our growing library of membership courses and videos. Learn more about our membership at academyofIdeas.com/members. Authoritarianism in religion and science, let alone politics, is becoming increasingly accepted. Not particularly because so many people explicitly believe in it, but because they feel themselves individually powerless and anxious. So what else can one do except follow the mass political leader, or follow the authority of customs, public opinion, and social expectations? The American psychologist Rollo May wrote these words in 1953, and in the decades that followed, the West tiptoed into tyranny. A mass surveillance state was established. Free speech gave way to increasing levels of censorship. Statist bureaucracy and stifling regulations invaded ever more areas of life, and tax rates reached levels that in the past would have caused a revolution. However, in recent years, this tiptoe into tyranny has turned into a sprint, as some Western countries are flirting with full-blown totalitarian rule. But the existence of power-hungry and psychologically disturbed politicians who desire total control is not what makes our situation particularly precarious, for such individuals exist in all ages. Rather, our troubles lie with the fact that very few people possess the one virtue that can turn the tide back in the direction of freedom, that being the virtue of courage. And as Alexander Solzhenitsyn warned in 1978, a decline in courage may be the most striking feature which an outside observer notices in the West in our days. Should one point out that from ancient times, declining courage has been considered the beginning of the end? In this video, we are going to explore how a hyperconformity and blind obedience has infected the West and, in the process, crowded out the cultivation of courage. We will discuss how a widespread cowardice is permitting the rise of authoritarianism, and how a rebirth of courage is the antidote to our precarious political predicament. The pathological conformity that infects the West is generations in the making and the result of a confluence of factors. It is driven by a value system in which social validation occupies a preeminent position. It is furthered by the use of social media and the fact that success on these platforms is achieved by virtue signaling and conforming to the moral flavors of the day. It is also a product of an education system which deifies the democratic ideal and promotes the rights of the majority over the rights of the individual. These factors, combined with others, has created a society of hyper-conformists. And as Rollo May explained, the opposite to courage, in our particular age, is automaton conformity. One of the ways that Western conformity manifests is through a blind obedience and a pathological need to follow rules. Most people believe that to be a good person is to be a compliant person, and to do what one is told by those in positions of political power and their lackeys in the media and celebrity culture. In acting with blind obedience, the conformist fails to differentiate between morality and legality, and so remains willfully ignorant of the fact that government rules can be immoral, driven by corruption, and that sometimes they pave the way for individual and social ruin. Or as Rollo May explains, our particular problem in the present day is an overwhelming tendency toward conformity. In such times, ethics tend more and more to be identified with obedience. One is good to the extent that one obeys the dictates of society. It is as though the more unquestioning obedience, the better. But what really is ethical about obedience? If one's goal were simple obedience, one could train a dog to fulfill the requirements very well. To see other people exercise independent judgment, self-responsibility, and self-reliance disturbs the conformists' belief in the value of obedience and so threatens their sense of self. It is not the case, therefore, that the conformist obeys while permitting others the freedom to make their own choice. Rather, as Stanley Feldman explains in a paper titled Enforcing Conformity, people who value social conformity support the government when it wants to increase its control over social behavior and punish nonconformity. Valuing social conformity increases the motivation for placing restrictions on behavior. The desire for social freedom is now subservient to the enforcement of social norms and rules. Thus, groups will be targeted for repression to the extent that they challenge social conformity. When a majority advocates for the government enforcement of conformity, a society places itself on what the psychologist Irvin Staub called a continuum of destruction. As the government uses coercion and force to punish a non-compliant minority, the majority rationalizes their support of such authoritarian measures by further demonizing the non-compliant, thus leading to increasingly severe government measures. One psychological consequence of harm doing is further devaluation of victims. People tend to assume that victims have earned their suffering by their actions or character. In several countries in the 20th century, such as the Soviet Union, Turkey, Germany, Cambodia, and China, government measures such as banning certain minority groups from restaurants, pubs, cafes, and other public spaces, imposing curfews, expelling them from their jobs, forcing them to pay fines, and restricting their freedom of movement and assembly, functioned as the first steps on a continuum of destruction that ended in mass scapegoating, mass imprisonment, and mass murder. In his book, The Psychology of Good and Evil, Irvin Staub elaborates on the psychological mechanism that facilitates a continuum of destruction. How does harmful behavior become the norm? Doing harm to a good person or passively witnessing it is inconsistent with a feeling of responsibility for the welfare of others and the belief in a just world. Inconsistency troubles us. We minimize it by reducing our concern for the welfare of those we harm or allow to suffer. We devalue them, justify their suffering by their evil nature or by higher ideals. A changed view of the victims, changed attitude toward that suffering, and a changed self-concept result. To counter the continuum of destruction that is a product of too much conformity and too much government force, more people need to act with moral courage. Moral courage entails a willingness to encounter risks so as to defy immoral orders, reject authoritarian government control, and to stand up for the disappearing values of truth, freedom, and justice. And as Rushworth Kidder explains in his book, Moral Courage, where there's no danger, there's no courage. Anyone can endure security and well-being. The real challenges arise in the face of hazard. So it is with moral courage, where danger is endured for the sake of an overarching commitment to conscience, principles, or core values. Some acts of moral courage are accompanied by mild risks, such as being ridiculed, insulted, or ostracized. If, for example, we speak out against a status quo belief in the presence of a group of conformists, or if we refuse to adhere to social practices or mandates that are immoral or idiotic, we may lose friends or attract choice words from the obedient, but this is a small price to pay in exchange for doing what we believe is right. For as Rollo May explains, the hallmark of courage in our age of conformity is the capacity to stand on one's own convictions. However, sometimes acts of moral courage are accompanied by more grave risks, including but not limited to the loss of employment, physical or financial penalties, imprisonment, or in some cases, even death. Of all the agonizing ethical dilemmas facing humanity, writes Rushworth Kidder, few are more wrenching than the choice between what's right for the world and what's right for you and your family. Carl Jung called the men and women willing to confront great dangers in defiance of tyranny the true leaders of mankind. And to learn about the mindset of one of these leaders, we can turn to the story of Viktor Pestov. In 1967, Pestov was a 20-year-old living in the Soviet Union. His family was well off by Soviet standards, and his mother was a high-ranking member of the KGB. Yet Pestov could not avert his eyes from the boot of tyranny that was crushing society, and so he took a keen interest in political matters. And when Soviet tanks rode into Czechoslovakia and violently stamped out the human rights protest known as the Prague Spring, Pestov told his friend, "We must do something about this." Pestov and his brother set up a clandestine group called Free Russia, and he warned those who joined that they would likely be arrested within the year. Yet all agreed that the battle for freedom justified the risk, and so they began publishing pamphlets exposing the lies of the Soviet regime, and snuck out in the dead of night to distribute them. The KGB quickly identified the group as a threat, and in 1970, Pestov was arrested. His mother was fired from the KGB and never allowed to work in Russia again, and Pestov was sentenced to 5 years in a Soviet prison camp. Pestov decided to stand up to the Soviet regime and therein place himself and inadvertently his mother in great danger, because he could not in good conscience sit idly by as a corrupt regime of thousands destroyed the lives of millions. He understood that if he did not stand up for the freedom of others, he could not expect others to stand up for his, and that if nobody did anything, everyone was doomed. And so, he chose to face danger, to fight for freedom, and to place a portion of the fate of society on his back. He saw himself as fighting against the malevolent idea that someone will think for you, someone will make decisions for you, and as he explained, a person should be the master of his own fate. In a conversation with Rushworth Kidder, Pestov reflected on the grave dangers he voluntarily faced, and on the 5 years he spent in prison. "I believe I did the right thing," Pestov concluded. "I wasn't silent. I was saying and doing what I had to do. There was a very small contribution of mine to the fact that the communists were pushed out of power. Unless more people can muster up the moral courage to renounce conformity in favor of standing up for freedom and for what is right, and at the very least make a small contribution to combating tyranny, Western societies will continue moving towards what Ayn Rand called the stage of the ultimate inversion. Or as she warns, we are fast approaching the stage of the ultimate inversion, the stage where the government is free to do anything it pleases, while the citizens may act only by permission, which is the stage of the darkest periods of human history, the stage of rule by brute force. Become a supporting member and access our growing library.
As you're watching this, some of the last old-growth trees in rainforests across British Columbia.
The masses have never thirsted after truth. They turn aside from evidence that is not to their taste, preferring to deify error if error seduced them. Whoever can supply them with illusions is easily their master. Whoever attempts to destroy their illusions is always their victim. Diseases of the body can spread through a population and reach epidemic proportions, but so too can diseases of the mind. And of these epidemics of the latter variety, the mass psychosis is the most dangerous. During a mass psychosis, madness becomes the norm in a society, and delusionary beliefs spread like a contagion. But as delusions can take many forms, and as madness can manifest in countless ways, the specific manner in which a mass psychosis unfolds will differ based on the historical and cultural context of the infected society. In the past, mass psychoses have led to witch hunts, genocides, and even dancing manias. But in the modern era, it is the mass psychosis of totalitarianism that is the greatest threat. Totalitarianism, writes Arthur First Lewis, is the modern phenomenon of total centralized state power, coupled with the obliteration of individual human rights. In the totalized state, there are those in power, and there are the objectified masses, the victims. In a totalitarian society, the population is divided into two groups, the rulers and the ruled, and both groups undergo a pathological transformation. The rulers are elevated to an almost godlike status, which is diametrically opposed to our nature as imperfect beings.
We live in a consumer society. Our lives revolve around shops, supermarkets, new experiences, new stuff.
We're in the midst of one of the busiest shopping weekends of the year.
Well, the notion of the conscious consumer has certainly gained traction.
The textile industry in Leicester has been under investigation.
A world surrounded by image, advertising, marketing, one-day delivery, product placement, gadgets, and fast fashion. We are supposedly shallow, obsessed with the self, narcissistic and vain. Building personal castles of consumption on the foundations of things we don't really need. But is this true?
What was that story? Oh yeah, about Narcissus, the man who always looked in the mirror of himself.
In some sense, of course, we've always consumed. And while we now do consume the latest frivolous fashion and want the latest pointless gadget, we also consume meaningful things, new foods and books, travel and art. So consumerism is a broad and a vague concept. From the Latin consumer, it used to mean to use up, and was limited to things like candles, food, drink and wood. Things that you would literally consume would disappear. But it's obvious that throughout the modern period, and increasingly from the 1950s, something new has happened. A consumer revolution, maybe. Consumption expanded across the classes. It began to dominate all of our lives. At some point, we transformed into a consumer society.
Mass production?
The consumer society is different from previous forms of consumption. We have a wider variety of goods, shops and services. We have more pervasive marketing. Everything is commercialized and exchanged. And consumerism has become not just about producing new goods, but has become a cultural phenomenon. In his classic 1993 book, Land of Desire, historian William Leach says that, quote, the cardinal features of this culture were acquisition and consumption as the means of achieving happiness, the cult of the new, the democratization of desire, and money value as the predominant measure of all value in society. And historian Peter Stearns defines consumerism as, quote, a society in which many people formulate their goals in life partly through acquiring goods that they clearly do not need for subsistence or for traditional display. So today, I want to explore our consumer world, that landscape of desire. What does consumerism mean? Is it even a useful concept? Is the West, are we, shallow? Does consumerism make us ill? Does it alienate us from our true selves? What does it mean to be surrounded by image, by advertising, by celebrity? Is there any possibility of ethical consumption? Is there any way out?
Like the waters of a mighty ocean, people also represent a tremendous force. The understanding of which is of greatest importance to the American way of life. This force is known as consumer power. To fully understand the function of outdoor advertising in modern living, it is necessary to keep in mind the day-by-day activities of the people who are reached by this powerful form of advertising medias. They work, they play, they study, and most important of all, they buy.
First, we need to look at the history of how consumerism developed, what we might have lost, and when and why this change happened, to really understand what our consumer society is. Modern consumerism, as we understand it today, began to develop in the city-states of Renaissance Italy in the 15th century. Trade between the Far East, Middle East and Europe increased, merchants became wealthier, and disposable income became more common.
There are 3 simple changes I tell all of my arthritis patients to make. Number 1, you have to...
Resist much, obey little. Once unquestioning obedience, once fully enslaved. Once fully enslaved, no nation, state, city of this earth ever afterward resumes its liberty. These were the words of caution which the great poet Walter Whitman offered to his fellow Americans. For Whitman recognized that crucial to a free and flourishing society are men and women who are willing to question and even resist authority when necessary. But today, very few of us live by the ideal espoused by Whitman. Rather, blind obedience is the norm. We have become populations of sheep, easily to be herded into the chains of tyranny. But what has led those of us in the West to largely shun the advice of Whitman? In this video, we will examine 2 institutions that have played an integral role in the breeding of a passive citizenry: the compulsory state-run education system, which in North America is called the public school system, and the mainstream media. Public schooling is viewed as one of the shining lights of the modern Western world. Who could question the value of an institution that provides free and compulsory education for all? But as with many institutions of our day, the textbook picture of how the institution should work greatly diverges from the reality of how it does work. If public schools taught individuals how to think, if they promoted intellectual curiosity and produced citizens healthy in body and mind, then few would question their value. But beneath the veneer presented by the bureaucrats that run this institution, a darker reality emerges. Or as John Taylor Gatto, a former teacher turned one of public schooling's greatest critics, writes, "Schools are intended to produce formulaic human beings whose behavior can be predicted and controlled. To a very great extent, schools succeed in doing this, but in a national order in which the only successful people are independent, self-reliant, confident, and individualistic, the products of schooling are irrelevant. Well-schooled people are irrelevant. They can sell film and razor blades, push paper and talk on telephones, or sit mindlessly before a flickering computer terminal. But as human beings, they are useless. Useless to others and useless to themselves." Noam Chomsky echoed this sentiment, writing in his book Understanding Power, "Given the external power structure of the society in which they function, the institutional role of the schools, for the most part, is just to train people for obedience and conformity, and to make them controllable and indoctrinated." To some, this may sound like heresy, but a study of history reveals that this was the intention from the very start. The state-run school systems in the West were modeled off the factory style of education first introduced in Prussia in the early 1700s. What shocks, writes Gatto, is that we should so eagerly have adopted one of the very worst aspects of Prussian culture, an educational system deliberately designed to produce mediocre intellects, to hamstring the inner life, to deny students appreciable leadership skills, and to ensure docile and incomplete citizens, all in order to render the populace manageable. Albert Einstein, an individual who reached heights of genius rarely seen, did not credit his compulsory schooling with his intellectual development. Reflecting back on his school years, Einstein noted that after completing his final examinations, his interest in the field he would go on to revolutionize was all but dead. I found the consideration of scientific problems, he wrote, distasteful to me for an entire year. Einstein believed that one of the major flaws of compulsory, state-run education systems is their forced style of teaching. It is, in fact, nothing short of a miracle, he wrote, that the modern methods of instruction have not yet entirely strangled the holy curiosity of inquiry. It is a very grave mistake to think that the enjoyment of seeing and searching can be promoted by means of coercion and a sense of duty. After well over a decade of indoctrination in the school system, few emerge with a great thirst for knowledge and a curiosity toward the many mysteries of the world. Instead, as Bruce Levine writes in his book Resisting Illegitimate Authority, by the time a student graduates, they have been bred to be passive, to be directed by others, to take seriously the rewards and punishments of authority, to pretend to care about things that they do not care about, and that one is impotent to change one's dissatisfying situation. But if our schooling cannot be relied upon to generate the critical and curious minds needed to protect a society from the actions of corrupted authorities, can the mainstream media play this role? While there has been an increasing skepticism toward this institution in recent years, distaste and distrust toward the mainstream media has a long history. I have given up newspapers, wrote Thomas Jefferson, in exchange for Tacitus and Thucydides, for Newton and Euclid, and I find myself much the happier. Nietzsche, one of the most intellectually free and curious minds of history, was also no fan of the mainstream media. Sick are they always. They vomit their bile and call it a newspaper. Richard Weaver, a professor at the University of Chicago in the first half of the 20th century, found it ironic that while we have freed ourselves from the Earth-centered view of the cosmos, we have all the while dove headlong into an illusory view of the world created by the mainstream media. And while Weaver focuses on newspapers in the following passage, as they were the dominant medium of his day, his words are even more applicable today, where modern technology offers far better tools for the manipulation of the masses. A great point is sometimes made of the fact that modern man no longer sees above his head a revolving dome with fixed stars. True enough, but he sees something similar when he looks at his daily...
Ramen, dude, really? I'm the one, the only ramen. Back on the 360. I'm also the one and the only Antler. The one and only MD.
Newspaper. The newspaper is a man-made cosmos of the world of events around us at the time. For the average reader, it is a construct with a set of significances which he no more thinks of examining than did his pious forebear of the 13th century think of questioning the cosmology. But why does the mainstream media so often choose deception over truth? Noam Chomsky, in his book Media Control, suggests that, like many politicians, the mainstream media is dominated by individuals who adhere to an elitist ideology. The 20th century journalist Walter Lippmann epitomized this view, calling the masses the bewildered herd, and suggesting that one of the main functions of the media is to put this herd in its proper place as passive spectators, not active participants in the organization of a society. Or as Chomsky explains, This elitist ideology is built on the notion that the mass of the public are just too stupid to be able to understand things. If they try to participate in managing their own affairs, they're just going to cause trouble. Therefore, it would be immoral and improper to permit them to do this. We have to tame the bewildered herd, not allow the bewildered herd to rage and trample and destroy things. For those of us who are not among the self-anointed elite, the question arises as to whether the controlling of the bewildered herd is done in order to promote a prosperous and flourishing society, or merely to maintain certain institutional structures which favor the elites to the detriment of society at large. This open question only reinforces the need for a more skeptical attitude toward the authority figures of our day. We need, in other words, more anti-authoritarians. It must be stressed that an anti-authoritarian is not someone who, in place of a passive acceptance of authority, adopts a passive rejection of all authority. Many institutions and authority figures serve a beneficial purpose and therefore should be accepted. But anti-authoritarians recognize that consensus does not mean truth, that power corrupts, that people lie, and that some institutions, in the words of Chomsky, have no moral justification. They are just there in order to preserve certain structures of power and domination. Recognizing these undeniable facts, the anti-authoritarian is willing to look at all authority figures with a healthy dose of skepticism, and potentially even resist their commands if such authority proves corrupt and harmful to the well-being of a society. Or as Henry David Thoreau wrote, "If the machine of government is of such a nature that it requires you to be the agent of injustice to another, then, I say, break the law." But should we fear a world with more anti-authoritarians? The obedience bred into us in school and the blind deference to authority promoted by the talking heads of the mainstream media may lead some to view anti-authoritarians as a threat to the stability of society. But nothing could be further from the truth. Anti-authoritarians are the crucial protectors of a flourishing society. For as the author C.P. Snow noted, when you think of the long and gloomy history of man, you will find more hideous crimes have been committed in the name of obedience than have ever been committed in the name of rebellion. Malevolent authority, combined with a passive citizenry, is the recipe for tyranny, and so anti-authoritarians should not be feared or ostracized. They should be welcomed. They are the individuals who raise the alarm and awaken the slumbering masses to the existence of corrupt authority. A society without a healthy number of anti-authoritarians, or a society in which anti-authoritarians are shunned and silenced, is a society that has chosen the comfort of illusions over the desire for truth, and is therefore a society paving the way for its own destruction. Or as the 18th century French philosopher Voltaire cautioned, so long as the people do not care to exercise their freedom, those who wish to tyrannize will do so. For tyrants are active and ardent, and will devote themselves in the name of any number of gods, religious or otherwise, to put shackles upon sleeping men.
Esso has big news. Now you can redeem PC Optimum points at Esso stations on car.
So yesterday, President Volodymyr Zelensky addressed Parliament. He said that a Ukrainian victory would be a victory over the concept of war itself, and that it would send a message to those who would seek to challenge the global order. Giving our helmets in Parliament a helmet was apparently enough of a ceremonial gesture to secure military training, aid, and even fighter jets, all paid for by us, that actually work for this country. Dominique's here today because you requested specifically to cover this, to discuss with me why exactly the West seems obsessed with funneling all its money to Ukraine.
I mean, it's a really, really interesting question because firstly, you just have to look at whether or not things make sense. And they don't make sense. I mean, the idea that's being continually pushed in the media is that Zelensky is this war hero. That's why he goes around in that green get-up as if he's this war general fighting for freedom.
Yeah, it's H&M custom outfit.
Yeah, I mean, number one, Ukraine is an extremely corrupt country. Number two, it's not a democracy. The guy is effectively a tyrant, banning news organizations that he doesn't like.
And the rival parties.
Yeah, attacking churches that are quote-unquote, associated with Russia or, pushing Russian disinformation. And thirdly, Russia is winning. And I'm sorry, some people might be offended by this. They might be like, oh, because Russia couldn't take Kiev, that means that, we're going to win. No, Russia is winning the war. They've taken up considerable territories, particularly in the east of Ukraine, which is the area of Ukraine that Russia wants already. To make matters worse, even the IMF projected that Russia's GDP will actually grow in 2023.
Yeah, it's grow. They're instantiating a parallel economy, which we'll talk about.
They can afford to fund this war. The facts are that Ukraine can't. And in regards to our military, Boris the buffoon demanding that we send all of our, he was telling us to send them all of our jets, all of our tanks, everything, send it all to Ukraine. I want to know who is paying this buffoon to basically campaign for us to remove all of our defense stocks, because the US Secretary General, there was a story about this in Sky recently, said to Ben Wallace, our defense minister, that that we wouldn't actually last in an armed, like a full-scale war. Our ammunition would last a few days, he said. A few days. That's a problem. Meanwhile, we're running around offering fighter jets when, one, our stockpiles are depleting and we cannot actually replenish them quick enough. We've had to import them. And number two, in terms of the fighter jets, we don't even have enough pilots to be able to train people to use the fighter jets we have already. So how are we sending them to Ukraine? That's partly why Rishi Sunak is saying that it's a long-term commitment, because we simply don't actually have the capability. So who is pushing this? What is the agenda? And I think really there is a wider agenda here. I don't know what it is, and I think it's to do with, I don't know,
I think it's
grinding
sunk costs.
Yeah, but either grinding Europe to a halt. I mean, there was a whistleblower that came out recently. I think his name's Steve Hirsch. His second name is definitely Hirsch. He's an investigative journalist, Pulitzer Prize winner. He's come out and accused Joe Biden of being directly responsible for the Nord Stream 2 pipeline attack. So it seems that America has interest in wanting to grind Europe to a halt. The question is why?
Well, if you want to bribe the military-industrial complex, you're going to need a job so that they can tax you. If you do fancy a job, go over to lotuseaters.com careers page, and if you're able to be a web developer, cheers. I'm waiting for the call from Daily Wire. You can sign up and send us an email. If you're qualified, you will have to work from the office in Swindon or commute in for 5 hours a day like I do. But we're a good fun office here.
5 hours?
Yeah, 2.5 hours each way.
Oh, okay. Good for you. That's a commitment.
Yeah, well, Swindon's more horrible than London somehow, so...
I mean, more horrible than London? Okay, yeah. I thought you were going to say
I'm in a suburb, I'm not in central. I'm not dodging knives left and right, I'm fine. So, if we go to the next, this is just a quick summary of what happened at yesterday's meeting when Rishi and the poison dwarf himself nearly kissed. The UK training of Ukrainian forces is set to be expanded to cover fighter jet pilots and Marines, as you said. The UK also announced a fresh round of sanctions targeting Russia, and thereby itself. The latest sanctions target IT companies, as well as manufacturers of military equipment such as drones and helicopter parts. Plans have been announced to train Ukrainian pilots to fly NATO standard fighter jets in the future, a key request from Ukraine.
In the future.
Yeah. Number 10 said Mr. Sunak would be offering to provide Ukraine with longer range capabilities to disrupt Russia's ability to target Ukraine's critical national infrastructure. It added that British training would be scaled up this year with a further 20,000 Ukrainian soldiers set to be trained. I'm sure all of those have wonderful politics, and not a single one will be caught on Sky News driving past the camera with an Azov battalion logo. So how much money have we currently sent to Ukraine? We can go from the Express's summary here. Since the start of the war, the US has given the largest amount of military aid to Ukraine, totaling $22.9 billion, or that's euros there, so it's 20.5 billion pounds by November 20th, according to the Kiel Institute. 2022 marks the first time since the aftermath of the Second World War that a European country has been the top recipient of US foreign aid in a year. The UK is second on the list, having pledged £3.7 billion. Downing Street spokesperson said the Prime Minister was dedicated to ensuring Ukraine wins this war.
And you know what's funny is that we actually don't know where all of this is going. It's completely unregulated.
There was a woman who was a wife of some sort of official caught walking across the Polish border with a suitcase full of cash.
Interesting, but not surprising. And even there were some reports that weapons from Ukraine are ended up in the arms of Boko Haram. Nigeria. Yeah, the Nigerian, I don't know, did they have a president or a prime minister? The president said that weapons were appearing on the black market and actually arming these insurrection groups. So, yeah, there you go. When you write a blank check, it turns out that you actually end up arming terrorist groups. Sort of similar to what happened in Afghanistan.
Well, I was going to say the Chinese have been buying up the American military equipment from the Afghanis from a discounted price. If the Chinese and the Russians are in an economic pact, are we really believing those Black Hawks won't be ending up on the Russian front line?
Yeah, and it's just suspicious how Bad just left them all there. But, I mean, I guess that's a conversation for another day.
Yep. Well, so let's go to an update on the death toll, shall we? Oh, no, actually, we've got a clip from Zelensky himself. Let's listen to him saying.
We will win.
We know Russia will lose. And we really know the victory will change the world. And this will be a change that the world has long needed.
What change is that?
The United Kingdom is marching with us towards the most important victory of our lifetime. It will be a victory over the very idea of the war. After we win together, any aggressor, it doesn't matter big or small, will know what awaits him if he attacks international order. Any aggressor who will try to push the Bandaris by force, who will inflict destruction and death on other peoples, who will try to endure his dictatorship at the expense of other people's blood in criminal and unprovoked wars as the Kremlin does. Any aggressor is going to lose. Ladies and gentlemen, we have already achieved remarkable results, and we must make every effort to turn our achievements into the foundations of the future global security architecture. The world needs your leadership, Britain, just as it needs Ukrainian bravery.
Ukrainian victory will not only destroy the idea of war itself, a very progressive idea of an end of history where we're all living in utopia, but it'll also be the foundation of future global security. So they're admitting to reconstructing a world order based off of their approach to ending the Ukraine war.
So it's not about democracy then, is it?
Well, no, only if you define democracy in the sort of Leninist vanguard aspect of democracy over the proletariat by a bunch of Marxist ideologues that decide how we run our lives. So that would be the way. I do want to express, of course, the fact that I wouldn't really fancy living in Russia or Ukraine, and that there's a bunch of dead on both sides. I mean, the last death toll was estimated by France 24 at 180,000 killed Russian soldiers, and Ukrainians 100,000 military and 30,000 dead civilians. So they're kind of neck and neck at the moment. And
I mean, I don't believe those figures, and namely because they come from France 24.
Well, yeah, fair enough.
Which, I mean, they have an interest in making sure that people believe that, you know, Slava Ukraini. But if you look at other sources, particularly apparently just this month alone, that they've lost about 6,500 soldiers. But obviously, I will be transparent, this comes from the Russian defense minister, which, you know, fair enough, but you do have to actually look at what both sides are saying, because in terms of the losses in weaponry that Ukraine has incurred, the Russian defense ministry has said that they have managed to destroy about 26 planes, which sort of makes sense, because why is Zelensky coming to Britain? To demand planes.
Yeah. So the thing is, I'm willing to listen to both sides of statistics, mainly because I don't really have a dog in the fight, other than I don't want to pay for it.
For me, it was just when I first...
Sadly, it's better we have to listen to both sides. Hear both their numbers. Guess and hope that what's in the middle, in between those two numbers, close to truth. It's your best guess. All words are playful to the ones
saw what was going on, there's going to be a war in Ukraine, the narrative around it really reminded me of the narrative around COVID.
Yes.
And I've learned that if the mainstream media is in unison with one particular topic and the propaganda is,
relentless.
Yeah, that something weird is going on. And really, if Russia were in such dire straits, the Russian defense minister wouldn't be saying that their special operation will end by this year. Which suggests that they're sort of setting out what they want to do. And this isn't, I would say a controversial opinion. There's so many people from mainstream news outlets that are actually saying, in the East, Russian troops are hammering and that conflict doesn't look like it's going to end anytime soon. And they have made several gains. So I think just balance is probably needed instead of turning everyone into a warmongering zealot.
Yeah, but that's not very profitable, is it? I mean,
no.
Then you won't be able to have Raytheon show up at the Conservative Party conference and you can pose as their missile launchers in a booth, which actually happened.
Really?
I'm not making that up. Yeah, right by the cloakroom.
God.
Wasn't great. So, just in case we're accused of being conspiracy theorists here, I thought I'd bring up the Council on Foreign Relations, because if you're talking about the construction of a new world order with a Great Reset, or that Zelensky is trying to defend or reinstitute a world order with the defense of Ukraine, then you'll be accused of making things up. But there is actually a liberal world order that they're currently trying to conserve. Even Joe Biden said this and said there's going to be a new world order. So this is the conception they're trying to hold on to, perhaps. The United States, working closely with the United Kingdom and others, established the liberal world order in the wake of World War II. The goal was to ensure that the conditions that had led to 2 world wars in 30 years would never again rise, almost like a war on the concept of war for itself.
Yeah, and I mean, these terms like New World Order, Liberal World Order, these are established concepts in international relations anyway. I mean, I did it for my degree, so it's not like this is just conspiracy theory. These are genuine concepts that have been born out of a sort of American supremacy. But I think what is interesting is that this liberal world order that, the US is apparently trying to protect, is it really? Because I think that the greatest threat to this liberal world order has been the integration of China. And now we know that China doesn't want to be a part of this liberal world order. It actually wants to do the opposite, and it wants to actually be on top and replace America. The question is America happy to do that? I would say so. Is happy to import everything and anything from China in the name of climate change. I would think. Our solar panels that we love to bang on about, where do they come from?
80% of battery manufacturing comes from China.
Exactly. Yep. So we're very...
Yeah, a lot of the world. Most things you buy, where's it coming from? Go ahead, look right now. A few things that look made even companies that are based in the US, based in Canada. Stuff still is made in China, Korea. They use computers, no human labor, extremely cheap. Yeah, they charge you.
Much happy to prop up the Chinese economy whilst pretending we're interested in preserving the liberal world order. If you ask me, I think it's the opposite.
Yeah. So, not a conspiracy theory then. Good. Glad about that. What about the peace deals? Any prospect of the war ending anytime soon? Well, we have here a tweet from Michael Tracy, who documents how one of the former Israeli prime ministers tried to negotiate a peace deal.
Bless you. I don't know.
Sorry.
Say that.
Bit of a cough, unfortunately. Tried to negotiate a peace deal early on between Ukraine and Russia, and the Americans interceded and said, no, thank you very much. He said both sides very much wanted a ceasefire. Naftali Bennett said, former Israeli PM, but the US blocked it. On March 5th, 2022, 9 days after the invasion, Bennett secretly went to Moscow and met with Putin. Bennett says that Putin agreed to 2 big concessions, renouncing the denazification of Ukraine, understood to mean regime change, and renouncing the disarmament of Ukraine. Bennett says that simultaneously to this, again, based on his direct, intensive involvement with day-to-day negotiations, Zelensky had agreed to a big concession and would officially renounce NATO membership. Anything I did was coordinated down to the last detail with the US, Germany, and France, said Bennett. Bennett says he was in constant contact with Jake Sullivan, sometimes Antony Blinken, sometimes Biden himself. There was a decision by the West to keep striking Putin, he said, and it's clear he's talking about the US as a decisive player, more decisive than Ukraine or Russia.
Interesting, because there was a similar story in November last year and that was specifically about Boris Johnson.
Yes.
Apparently, that was what his performative trip to Ukraine was about. It was about stopping Zelensky from making any concessions to Putin. And then soon after that, you heard Zelensky screaming and shouting about Crimea. And we know that Russia, illegally, according to us, have had Crimea since 2014.
Yes.
There is no way that the war is going to end anytime soon if you then are starting to talk about Crimea, which suggests that you're not actually interested in the war ending anytime soon, which also suggests that there's a bigger agenda at play, because especially with the destruction of the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, it's all very focused on energy, and what are we obsessed with at the moment? It's net zero. And I think the two probably come hand in hand. I think this war is a convenient vehicle to accelerate that agenda.
Yeah, I definitely think that this...
That is very, very, very possible. Because look what happened to Germany. They got shut off from taking their natural gas, which was forced from Russia after they were forced to close down nuclear power plants. The only thing they had left to do? Reopen coal plants for coal power. And everyone would go, no, that's not good for the environment. What other fucking choice do they have? Freeze to death?
Is a, well, if not manufactured, then the Romer manual style crisis of never let a good crisis go to waste. And you're seeing the bifurcation of the global economy into the assets and resource-backed economy of BRICS. So the Saudis looking to trade more directly with Russia and get off the petrodollar, the Russians looking to do gold for oil exchanges, the Chinese having lots of their manufacturing capabilities and access to loads of the rare earth minerals in the 140 countries they've got under Belt and Road. Meanwhile, in the West, we're rapidly destroying the American petrodollar, which has been the mechanism for America to seize the global hegemon after how many years? We're trying to get onto renewables, which requires Chinese manufacturing and all those minerals that the Chinese have, unless we send Elon up into space and he mines asteroids anytime soon. But highly unlikely. And so we are committing economic and energy security suicide and acquiescing to the other side of the planet all of the resources that we need. And so we're becoming a very dependent economic bloc.
Exactly. And, you know, I really don't think this level of incompetence is by accident. But it reminds me of when you said never let a good crisis go to waste. You know, the advent of 15-minute cities.
Yes.
I was reading through the website that advocates for these things, and you know, conveniently it said that COVID-19 presented the perfect opportunity in order for us to realise the importance of us being closer together, and it's just, it makes me sick how people actually swallow this.
Yeah, the policy that was designed to imprison you in your home made us realise we need those prisons instantiated out on the streets.
Yeah.
You'll find if you go anywhere beyond the yard. Did you see the video from the Oxford City Council when, as soon as people started posting about this online, they said, we need to address this. This is misinformation. This is a conspiracy theory. It's just a couple of traffic cameras, no actual barriers. Even they started putting bollards in the streets. People
people are removing them. And what was interesting is that me and others, we posted about this, and then there seemed to be this designated journalist that wrote a Reuters article.
Oh, funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates
a
Foundation.
Reuters article saying, "Oh, hey, wait a minute, I fact-checked this. This isn't a climate lockdown. It's simply mechanisms to
traffic control measures to stop you moving anywhere.
Traffic control measures." And it's like, do you realise how ridiculous you are? But I just thought it was funny that this journalist was floating around commenting on each and every one of our posts, which suggests that narrative control.
They've got a confector consensus to manufacture.
It's not just in Oxford, it's spreading all across the country.
There's Bath, there's Canterbury, there's loads of places with the ULEZ zones as well.
That is the next VE passport. I mean,
yes.
You know what I mean? Yeah.
There's digital ID coming in 2023. The consultation's actually going on, so...
Right.
Yeah, I've already directed some people to give their responses. It's going to be passed no matter what we say, but
it doesn't matter.
All I did was filled out the questionnaire and then posted on Twitter to prove that I filled out the questionnaire and said, okay, if everyone else does the same, when they eventually pass it, even though the overwhelming amount of responses were negative, we've got some ground to go, well, hang on a minute here. people actually didn't want this. You're foisting on us anyway. There was also Joe Biden, apparently, according to a German newspaper, had offered Putin 20% of Ukraine to end the war early on. So the White House and the CIA have responded to a report that CIA Director William Burns offered Russian President Vladimir Putin a fifth of Ukraine's territory to end the war in Ukraine as part of a peace plan drawn up on behalf of
when I was saying this, that, you know, in order to sort of end this, what's going to end up happening is you're going to have to give up some territory. Territory that, you know, Russia's had for quite a while anyway. And everyone's like, oh no, you're paid by Russia. And Sleepy Joe is apparently offering 20%.
Well, Sleepy Joe's literally paid by China because via his son's investment firm, they were selling off oil to the Chinese.
Yeah, good old Hunter Biden, but we're not allowed to talk about him.
Oh, we will later, don't worry. A CIA official told Newsweek that claims in the report from the Swiss-German newspaper Neue Zürcher Zeitung that Burns took a secret trip to Moscow in January and that there was a peace proposal put forward by the director on behalf of the White House were completely false, apparently. Last month, Burns travelled in secret to meet and brief Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky in Kyiv, the Washington Post reported. Burns is said to have submitted the plan in mid-January to put an end to the war, which began on February 24th, 2022. The story was reported by NZZ on Thursday, citing high-ranking German foreign politicians. One of the politicians told NZZ that he believes it is becoming increasingly clear that the US is preparing for a long war of attrition. He raised concerns that Germany would suffer economically, financially, and militarily from such a war. And if we can go on to this video here, which you can watch for £5 subscribing to the website, which is Dan's Brokenomics series, Dan essentially breaks down how the Ukrainian war is actually quite beneficial to the Americans, because America, obviously taking out Detroit, all of their car manufacturing plants, cozying up to Russia, they're quite worried about the geopolitical security implications of relying on Russia for all their oil. Instead, the US can become, for a limited time, between now and the net zero deadline, which they tightly want to control. Biden said we only need oil for 10 more years in the State of the Union speech, for example. America could become the leading oil exporter and control the entire bloc of Europe and ensure that the euro is no longer a competitor to the dollar. So they can, for a short amount of time, retain the dominance of the petrodollar and then switch it to renewables.
It's so interesting that you say that, because after Nord Stream 2 was blown up, America actually said we have this pipeline. I can't remember which one it is, so I'm not, but if people look it up, they can probably find it. But after that, America had an alternative that coincidentally benefited them the most, which is interesting. And before the pipeline was actually blown up, Joe Biden did say, trust me, we can put a stop to it.
Yes.
So.
Yeah, it's nothing like the Americans have ever conducted any sort of subterfuge efforts on foreign soil before. Especially not to topple regimes in Iraq or Libya when they said they wanted to get off the petrodollar. They weren't happy. It's not like there was a pipeline in Syria between the Russians that they didn't like either. Weird, that conspiracy theory, I'm sure.
Conspiracy theory.
There's also another conspiracy theory here, just to almost finish up on, that the Americans and Ukrainians since 2005 have been investing in Soviet-era bio facility labs, which is quite weird. In 2005, Senator Obama, not President, Senator Obama, kind of strange that a junior Chicago senator would go over and investigate Ukraine.
Yeah.
And Senator Lugar visited former Soviet biological and chemical weapons facilities in Ukraine and established the US deep state roots there. From the Washington Post article that's been linked in this, it's there, you can go and read it. The United States and Ukraine agreed yesterday to work jointly to prevent the spread of biological weapons, signing a pact that clears the way for Ukraine's government to receive US aid to improve security at facilities where dangerous microbes are kept. The agreement, the result of more than a year of negotiations, was announced by Senators Richard Lugar and Barack Obama during a visit to the Ukrainian capital, Kyiv. The senators credited Ukraine's reformist leaders, ushered into power by last fall's Orange Revolution, with breaking bureaucratic resistance to the pact. One lab is to receive funding is the I'm going to have a really hard time pronouncing this, Meshnikov
Anti-Plague Scientific and Research Institute.
Meshnikov Anti-Plague Scientific and Research Institute.
Just do it in a Russian accent.
Meshnikov. There we go. Fantastic. The Port of Odessa. What are the numbers, Mason? The institute was part of a Cold War network of anti-plague stations that supplied highly lethal pathogens to Soviet bioweapons factories.
Yeah.
And then we know that President Obama, in thanking the 2005 government for being more pliable, one of his chiefs of staff, Victoria Nuland, was involved in that 2014 phone call that ended up getting Zelensky into power.
And,
how weird is that?
Yeah, and it was this Victoria Nuland who's on...
Open your eyes, folks. Open your eyes.
record on camera saying there are US biolabs in Ukraine. And, you know, they phrase it as, we're not dealing with deadly pathogens here. You know, although they've got things like anthrax in there. There was this one news report, this journalist, going into this biolab, and it was this really small biolab, didn't really seem to have any sort of security. And the lady goes that when Russia invaded, they had anthrax there that they actually had to destroy, like tiny machine anthrax. And the journalist was like, yeah, like, do you know what anthrax is?
Yeah. Yeah, not wise to have that very unsecured, is it? The interesting thing as well is that so the US firm that took over it was Metabiota, and it was awarded a grant by the Pentagon's Defense Threat Reduction Agency. Hunter Biden's investment firm fundraised and invested in Metabiota.
Ding,
and
ding,
then,
ding.
If we go down to just tweet 14, please, John, because this is a really interesting one. Volodymyr Zelensky ordered the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense to destroy all state documents affiliated with US biolab companies Metabiota and Batel. So he deleted all the documents, and we have some here from the orders that have been translated. So there might be some sunken costs, which is why the Americans want to prolong this war, as do the Brits, because we'll wrap up on our very own favourite Tobias Ellwood, the man who was part of the Ministry of Defence's 77th Brigade, which recently spied on Peter Hitchens' video on Brewer.
And that was a conspiracy theory once as well. Majid Nawaz said it first.
Yes.
Although, you know, Big Brother Watch is the one who did the report. Majid Nawaz said this way before.
Oh, if you keep saying things like that, Tobias Ellwood won't unblock you.
Yeah.
If we can just listen to his own words.
We are now at war in Europe. We need to move to a war footing. We are involved in that. We've mobilized our procurement processes. We're gifting equipment. We need to face Russia directly and rather than leaving Ukraine to do all the work.
So he just wants to institute a British ground war in Ukraine.
Which we're not in any position to do. We're just not.
But even if we were, I'm not content to send blood and treasure overseas and have young, brave British men die for either corrupt Eastern European country.
Exactly. I'd much rather focus on what is going on here. Please, someone.
But unfortunately, we're not going to get that, and instead we're going to be made to pay for the military-industrial complex forever. So, like any forever war, peace is never the most profitable course of action. Great stuff.
We appreciate it.
Eververse isn't just a title, it's a farce. She said she wanted to express herself, so I gave her a thumbs up.
Thank you, light.
If oil and gas came with a label, you would learn our industry is working to reduce greenhouse gas emissions through innovative technologies.
The best analytics and AI should be for everyone. Introducing SaaS Via, the fastest.
Now, Mike Wigston, who was my boss when I was on 12, and again, he's a great guy.
he did a report into bullying called the Wigston Report. And I think with that, he then came in and saw that as his lead, as his, right, that's my thing. So then he came in and said, we've got to celebrate diversity. What is diversity anyway? I tell you how I know I like this place. I walk in here, I look at the books around here, I own half of them myself, which means we're talking to each other, of course. You've got Douglas Murray's book over there. You've got Thomas Sowell over there. I mean, it's, all these books. It's like my own library in here. I wish some people would read some of these books sometimes. It should be like mandated reading. Just, it's not difficult, is it? Just read these books.
Well, Lotus Eaters do book clubs
on
various things. It's on the website. Check out.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. It's how we enlighten ourselves. And so he's dragged this stuff through, and I think within the military there are some elements that have really bitten into this. So the pronouns in the bio thing was a big thing for me. I think that's a cult. Okay, we do this in 10 years' time. We put pronouns in bio. And I had one of the guys I was chatting to on Twitter. Why on Twitter am I doing this? Because I was a fighter pilot, like a fight. Fighter pilot. Right? Why not? But he was saying, this guy was saying, look, I put pronouns on my signature footer at the bottom, whatever, because his name was, I think, Stuart Roxbury or something. And he was an officer in the Air Force, I believe, or maybe the Navy. He said, because I sometimes sign my emails Roxy, and people don't know whether I'm a girl or a boy. And I said, well, God forbid you might be professional and actually sign it Stuart. You know what I mean? It's like, well, stop being an idiot, mate. We're not 15 years old, are we? Yeah. You're in the military. Yeah. Sign it Stuart. Or whatever your name is, Lieutenant Roxbury or whatever it is, It's that kind of thing. And that obviously blew his mind that he, it's like, oh, that's an interesting point. It's like, yeah, stop being a dick, mate. Come on, just sign it. And I got another one as well. A lady said, well, my name's Joe, and sometimes people think I'm a guy. You don't explode, do you? You know what I mean? Just. So now they've stopped addressing emails as sir and ma'am because you're assuming someone's gender if you do that, apparently. It's bloody military.
Who even cares?
I know, right? Well, no one cares, but it's a way that you can be that victim. And I think people like being a victim nowadays, don't they? It's easier to be a victim than it is actually go out and pick a weight up or get a job.
It's the easiest thing in the world to claim you're offended.
Exactly. I don't care if you're offended. Be offended. Yeah. I think Douglas Murray says that. Take offence. I don't care. When do we stop? You know what I mean? So it's just weakness that's permeating society, I think, to a certain extent. And I personally hate it. And the fact it's got into the service that I was in 15 years, it's greatly upsetting. What that thing you referred to was an email that someone sent from an outer office. And I think what happened is Paramount had said to the Royal Air Force, even though it's a Navy film, they said to the Royal Air Force, do you want to send some pilots down here to stand around a mock-up Typhoon, which they had at the premiere with Tom Cruise? And the Air Force, unfortunately, decided, wouldn't it be great to show diversity out there? Because we only got 2.5% ethnic minorities within the service, which is lower than the Army, but the Army goes out all over the world, doesn't it, and recruits from different nations, and that's how they get their diversity one up. And the Navy's a bit better on that, but of course if you're the boss of the Air Force, you've got 2.5%, the other chiefs are saying, we're better than you, mate, you know what I mean? And the government did have targets, by the way, to bring more ethnic minorities in to the military. They haven't got targets now.
Conservative government.
Yeah, the targets were met, so they haven't officially got targets now, but they did have targets. And the Royal Air Force have said, well, we want to be 30%, 30% ethnic minority by, I think it's 2025 or something like that. My argument is, I think it might be 20% ethnic minority and 30% women. And all you've got to do is ask why.
Why? Yeah, why? How is that best?
It's a meritocracy. So now and of course the best people may be within these cohorts. I'm not denying that whatsoever. But the issue with the email was the young lady, well, I assume she's called Sarah. I'm assuming she was a young lady, but you never know nowadays. Didn't have her pronouns down, unfortunately, so I couldn't really tell. So I'm sorry if I'm offending her. But she'd written, assuming they'd written, preferably, she said, I need a pilot to attend this event, preferably not a white male. And that was sent to me by, I think, about 25, 30 different people, just flood in. I normally try and validate this before. I've got some contacts still in the service. I've got a lot of contacts. So I wrote to someone quite senior, and I said, I'm going to whack this out on a video. He's like, yeah, we thought you would. And he's cool in the gang. He's like, yeah, dude, nothing we can do about it. And I said, can you just tell me if it's real? And he said, yeah, it came from whatever office it came out of. So I did a video about it. And rightly so, because there's 84% of the Royal Air Force that is a white man. And so my argument being, if you're going to be inclusive, you've got to be inclusive of everyone. And yeah, I'm called names for this and stuff. Someone the other day, it happened again on LinkedIn, a friend of mine, Joe, She's very serious. She's very senior in the military. She's very senior in the Air Force. She's a great person. She put a picture up on LinkedIn saying, "So privileged to work with a great bunch of people," and there was no white man in that picture. It was, there was black and Asian, Sikh, and all that kind of stuff, and her as a white woman. And it was actually there was no context to the picture. You see, so you think she's saying, "Great to work with," and all I said was, "Jay, you need a white man in there." But if you're going to be inclusive, put a white dude in. That's what I'm saying. It doesn't. I mean, you've got everyone else. You know what I mean? Just then you would be inclusive, surely.
Right, yeah.
But if you don't have a white man in there, you're not.
No, you're quite right. I think that the idea of inclusivity or diversity, it's a trick. They don't want diversity. I feel like diversity is code for less white people. It's simple as that. It's not diverse. As you say, you end up with a picture where there's no white men at all. I mean, how perverse is that? So it's not diversity. In fact, you're talking about something else.
Well, as Thomas Sowell says about diversity, is like that's the most nonsensical word in the world.
It barely means anything, does it?
And also, the other great thing about diversity, and I don't want to be that kind of white guy going, we mustn't be diverse, because I've got loads of, I'm that guy, I've got a black friend, crikey, I'm that, that guy, am I? But I don't see a problem. On my flight sim, by the way, I've never seen a single face of any single person on there. I was chatting with a dude the other day.
There's a true meritocracy there.
Well, of course it is.
And that's the best thing, I mean,
and sometimes a guy will go, a guy will send you a picture. I got sent a picture of an airline pilot. I have seen one, and he was an Egyptian guy. Been flying with the guy for years. It didn't bother me, it didn't bother him, it didn't bother anyone. It was, why would it?
Yeah.
We're making it bother something. So we're making it an issue, aren't we? Or people are, because they're just race grifters, aren't they?
Right.
It's the Stella Creases of this world that want to be bringing something in about nothing, and talking about women can have a penis and it's all that kind of stuff. But they've got to be doing it for a reason. I don't even want to talk about Stella Creasy because you guys did a great video on that recently, and I watched that and I thought that was superb. So yes, I did a piece on that. The Air Force again actually held their hands up to it and said, yeah, it's hit us inside the Air Force as well. That doesn't do us any good whatsoever. It actually puts us back. It makes us look like idiots. And actually, I think Paramount withdrew the invite because of the bad publicity.
Right.
So they think Cara Vorderman was there instead with a top open, so that doesn't do any good, does it?
Because you saw the film, you've seen
the
new...
I've seen that, yeah.
Was it any good?
Yeah, it's all true.
Alert,
all
please,
true. Yeah. Spoilers alert. No, it's the film is a great. I think someone labelled it as a men's weepy epic or something, and it really looks, I think, at masculinity and age. I think age is a great thing. The great thing for me about it, I mean, obviously they asked me to do it, and I said, give it to Tom. He's old. He's a pensioner now. He needs the money, doesn't he? You know what I mean? I can't take the gig. Can't take the gig. But no, he's great in it, and he's happy to be great. Does that make sense? He's loving every moment. He's filming it. He's smiling throughout. I think he really enjoyed himself, and that's what made the film great.
He can fly in real life. He owns a P-51, I believe.
Yeah, I don't want to spoil anything for you, but yeah, his aircraft is in that. His aircraft's in the film.
Oh, right, okay.
Yeah, and yeah, he's in the film. I mean, yeah, I like it. It's worth going to see. It could have been, because it was made in the era, or the peak woke era, wasn't it? And it could have been like that, and it isn't at all.
Oh, good. Oh, yeah. Well, I will check it out.
Yeah, it isn't at all. I was really worried. I was slating it. I was like, it's going to be rubbish. But no, he's done a good job there. Yeah.
I do want to ask you another sort of fairly serious question about wokeness before we move on from that. But one last thing, just when you see like a film like Top Gun or the remake or any movie, any TV drama where you see fast jets in, or even any aeroplane, do you ever notice, oh, that's so wrong? You know,
all the time. Yeah, it's a film. Yeah, it's a film though, and the majority of jet flying is quite tedious, to be fair. You've got to think about what you're doing. I'm sat in a cockpit, strapped in. I can't move. I've got G-pants on. I've got life vest. Okay, so if we go through so being a jet pilot is actually quite hard work. You've got to put your long johns in, which are fire-resistant material. Then you've got to put a flight suit over the top, which is fire-resistant material. Then you've got your G-pants, you've got your life preserver, you've got a helmet, you've got your gloves. You've got bits of metal around your legs where the ejection seat lanyards go through. You attach the ejection seat to the top of your arms here, so as you leave the aircraft, it rips your whole of your line of your life vest and keeps your hands down here so you don't get flaying injury. So you've got all that. Then you're connected to oxygen, which is force feeding anyway. During the flight, whenever you pull G, your trousers inflate and cause a lot of pressure. And most of the time, you're transiting somewhere. You're at low level, transiting to a target. And then there's about 20 seconds of pure terror, and then you transit home again, and then you land a jet. So, yeah, I mean. Transit home again, and then you land a jet. So, yeah, I mean, when you see the film, I won't ruin it. I mean, I was an electronic warfare instructor, so my speciality was SA2s, SA3s, SA6, 11s, all these surface missile systems, enemy radar systems. So of course I look at it, and my wife was loving it. She's there going, "Oh, it's amazing, jet pilot's so cool." I'm like, "Yeah, we do that." Yeah, all that. She tells people that all the time. She's like, "That's so uncool being a jet pilot, being married to a jet pilot." You know what I mean? I was like, "Shut up, pick me up, innit? Pick me up."
Have you ever been tempted to tell people you've done stuff that you have done? Oh yeah, no, I've taken out 7 MiGs personally in one day once. I wouldn't expect you would.
No, I'm not that guy.
I wouldn't expect you to. It's a silly question.
No, it's fine. But the lessons I take across, the lessons I try and give out are more tangible, usable lessons about either learning or career development, whatever it might be, that help people out. The background and things we do. I'd love to move on to something else now, but I don't have that 20-year investment, and to get it to take another 20 years. I don't know what I'd do. I mean, you were talking downstairs about what you did previously, and that's interesting to me. I'm like, oh, that's really cool, but I know it's not. I know bits of it is not, and so moving into another industry now would be difficult, and I'd be at the bottom, and I don't want to do business development. So I use those lessons and I present them in many different kind of ways I can. But no one. I don't know any pilots that would really talk about stuff they haven't done.
Right. Yeah. No.
But their mates would call them out anyway.
Right. Yeah. I feel like almost like comically when you realise you're speaking to someone who really knows nothing about it. You sort of say, "Oh yeah, you wouldn't dream of it." But I remember one time you talking about you've met some F-22 dudes, and I remember you saying that they're just sort of the creme de la creme.
Yeah, I was very impressed actually.
That they've got sort of skills that are just above and beyond. I remember you saying that a guy realised he quit because it was so intense, or he realised he was towards the end of his career anyway, and he realised they were sort of targeting things behind them.
That's right.
And it just sort of blew his mind.
He was the base commander, and he was flying with young F-22 pilots. He was in charge of the base they were on. He can fly the aircraft, and he did the workup and everything. And they're young people that fly airplanes now they put a lot of work in, put that way, and they're very talented, and the aircraft are very complicated, and I've got a lot of time for them. It was a real privilege to train some of them up. I've got a lot of time. And in America, the F-22 is renowned as being, you send the best people onto that jet. And we're all nerds, right? So we're all geeks. Don't get me wrong. Don't think, jet pilots are cool and playing volleyball and stuff like that. I love that, but they're not. They're all, they're all just absolute geeks. Because you got to read the manuals and you got to read the books and you got to learn all loads of stuff.
More Nigel Mansell than James Hunt.
Yeah. Was it Sex Breakfast of Champions? Wasn't it? That was James Hunt, wasn't it?
Yeah.
He died early, of course, isn't it? It's a shame.
Yeah.
Just keep budgie guards. It's a great autobiography I read of him. Anyway,
he was a heavy smoker, wasn't he?
Heavy.
Didn't help.
Drugs as well, wasn't it?
Oh, was it?
Yeah, a lot of drugs he took as well, recreational drugs. And I think that just shortened his life. I think he had a heart attack, didn't he? He was around a mate's house or something.
He was very young, yeah.
It's really good to read about him, though. I like that. He lived his life, I see, because this is us going off tangents, because you do this to me. He lived his life twice as fast, really, didn't he? So all his years, he just condensed, didn't he?
Yeah, burned very brightly.
Yeah, I think so. And, like rock stars that die early, isn't it?
Yeah. Fair play to him if that's how they wanted to do it.
I just see there was a lot left in him, and him keeping budgerigars and that kind of stuff, and his backstory was lovely. The whole thing is lovely. He had a relationship with Murray Walker, didn't he? And at the end, when he used to commentate with them, they used to hate each other, then they kind of warmed to each other. Old school F1. Don't get me talking about that now.
Me too.
But no, the F-22 guys, that guy was the commander, and he found himself just absolutely maxed out, we call it, like cognitively impaired, in a fight with all these young people, and he came down afterwards and went, I can't do it anymore. And I remember saying, he said, there are some clever people, that fly that airplane. Most of them then go into an astronaut program or something.
Right.
Or they,
it's crazily brave and honest, isn't it? I mean,
there is that
kind of beautifully brave and honest to say, okay, I'm out of my I'm like an instructor for this thing, and yet the truth is, I'm out of my depth here.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, that's great leadership, right?
Yeah, it really is. Yeah, I mean, exactly that. And I think you see quite a lot of that in flying, because if you don't do that, people die, and that makes you yours. So if you come back and you're open and honest about what you did. I remember there was a Frenchman on our squadron. I was really trying to get a culture in of this honesty on the squadron. Like, there is honesty, but just say, guys, we can learn a lot more from each other if we just bury the egos a little bit, and I mean, there aren't massive egos anyway, but you've got to have a bit of confidence to get in these jets, because they're big old airplanes, and you've got a lot of fuel behind you, and someone's attached a rocket to it. It's a bit weird. And I said, look, we could be a bit honest with this. And then people started opening up, and it all really changed when a mate of mine who's a French pilot, who I can never beat in air combat talk, is the French are very, very good at this stuff. He stood up in a Met brief once, and the French pilots are sort of renowned for their arrogance and scarf, and they're just, I don't know why, they just are. And this guy was the reverse of that. This guy was the most humble dude ever, one of the best fighter pilots I've ever seen. Like, what he could do with our airplanes against us, I could never even, he would tell me, he would show me videos of how to do it, and he would go through the three-dimensional stuff and how to use the speed and the buffet and how to use angles. I even flew with him in an airplane, and he even showed me what he was doing. I still couldn't replicate. He still beat me around the sky. There was a couple of guys in the squadron I could never touch, and he was one of them, and it was just fantastic. And I remember him standing up in a Met brief, so the early morning brief where we have the weather, and he put his hand up and he said, I want to tell people what happened yesterday, and he'd made an error, and he explained all. And he was such a senior guy as well, that from then on, everyone realised on the squadron that you could be honest, you could be open. And it was funny because I do some work with some businesses now. Doesn't really happen in businesses. I work with some city businesses. People wouldn't do that. And I think they're worried about either if they did it, other people in the business won't do it, so they will look stupid and might lose their job. But the business would grow if people were open and honest about errors they were making, or the fact that they may be out their depth somewhere, and could someone give them a hand? You think about that in a business. It's crazy wild. That trust.
Yeah.
That's the thing. Because the Navy SEALs, they do that on trust. They don't look for the best guy. They look for, on their SEAL Team 6 Special Forces team, they don't look for the best operators to go in there. They look for, ones that are really good, but ones that are really trustworthy.
Right.
And those are the ones they pick.
To watch the full video.
We're opening doors for the next generation.
Someone might feel inspired.
There's something called the read technique. So it's actually really effective because it causes very impressionable, low IQ and child to adolescents to buy into the framing of leading questions or just outright lies by prosecutors or investigators. And so it solicits a really high false confession rate. So it has an error margin of 40 to 55%.
That's ridiculous.
Yeah, and then a study of 340 exonerated cases found that 42% of juvenile crimes were from false confessions. And that's a rate of 2 to 3 times higher than adults. So the adults were at 13%. It has 9 steps of interrogation. So positive confrontation, which advises the suspect that the evidence has led the police to suspect the individual, and that offers the person an early opportunity to explain why the offence took place. So baked into that is, we know you did it, here's your first chance to confess. Then the second one is try and shift the blame away from the suspect to some other person or the circumstances that prompted the suspect to commit the crime. So that's saying, well, maybe it was this person, maybe it was the situation you found yourself in, and so this is your get-out clause. This might allow someone to shift the blame if they did do it, or it might make someone suggestible and afraid, try and blame someone else and implicate them in the crime. So you get a sort of Salem witch trials thing going on. Then try and minimize the frequency of the suspect's denials. So try and I hesitate to say gaslight them, but do not affirm their ability to say that I didn't do it. You continue pressing them, saying we know you did, even if they didn't. At this point, then it says the accused will often give a reason why he or she did not or could not have committed the crime. Try and use this to move towards the acknowledgement of what they did. So even if they're telling you that they didn't, you have to take that as that they did. And then reinforce the sincerity to ensure that the suspect is receptive. So say, it's okay, we're going to help you through this, we're going to make sure that you get the most lenient sentence possible if you just tell us what you did. Then the suspect will become quieter and listen. Move the theme of the discussion toward offering alternatives. If the suspect cries at this point, infer guilt. Especially with children or people who are cognitively impaired, if they're crying under stress, you take this as a sign of guilt. So this is a technique that they're all taught to do. Pose the alternative question by giving 2 choices for what happened, one more socially acceptable than the other. The suspect is expected to choose the easier option, but whichever alternative the suspect chooses, guilt is admitted. There is always a third option, which is to maintain they did not commit the crime. Then number 8, lead the suspect to repeat the admission of guilt in front of witnesses and develop corroborating information to establish the validity of the confession. And then number 9, document the suspect's admission of confession or have him or her prepare a recorded statement, audio, video, or written. And so 81% of the false confessions from this result in convictions. So even though they know
this is likely to lead to false confessions from children and cognitively impaired people. Even though most of those that have been overturned on the basis of false confessions were that, 81% of the false confessions still lead to convictions, and this is the way in which the American three-letter agencies are taught to interrogate suspects.
I knew it was bad from a methodological point of view in that it's almost designed to get false confessions. And I think that's effectively what it does. It's a very effective tool of getting confessions, whether they're truthful or not, is very different.
Yeah. If nobody's seen Making a Murderer, that is a really good example. So Brendan Dassey's 2016, his original confession was released in a document in 2016 by his post-conviction trial team, and that now reveals that law enforcement professionals themselves are using his confession tape as an example of how not to apply the Reed technique, but Brendan Dassey is still in prison. It's genuinely quite mad. So they're still using the technique, which has led to so many false confessions, and the example they use of how to achieve a false confession using the technique, the guy is still in prison even though he's saying I didn't do it.
Surveillance video can make or break criminal cases. With Magnet DVR Examiner,
using the technique, the guy is still in prison even though he's saying I didn't do it. It's clearly broken. Just
to play devil's advocate here, it is really difficult not to be biased, and especially if you've invested a lot of time and energy and there's a lot of social pressure upon you to find someone guilty, then there is a tendency towards that sort of perhaps irresponsible questioning.
I don't want to write off all these techniques either, because I don't know if you've heard of the Chris Watts murders. There was a Netflix documentary on the American Murder Family Next Door, and the reason that he ended up confessing to, not that his wife and kids had gone missing or run away, but that he'd actually killed his wife and kids and buried his kids in a giant oil tanker where he worked, was because he scored poorly on the polygraph, and so that prompted him to think the game was up. So it can correctly infer sometimes that people are lying and pressure them into being more forthcoming with their confessions. It's just not watertight. Neither is the Reed technique.
I mean, there are lots of different techniques to make people confess. Like you could in theory put, like, I don't know, a toy stuffed monkey on the desk and just get inside someone's head, just like the monkey can tell you're lying, because it's so strange. They're like, what? Well, it throws people off, it puts them off guard, and it kind of throws a cat amongst the pigeons in what they expect from the interview. And you can use anything as a sort of crutch to get people to confess if you can get inside their head and make them think it's all over when actually it's not.
Yeah, but I think a technique like that would also only properly work on, again, children and people who are quite impaired, and that's why you have to be quite careful as to who is present during the interrogation. I think they're trying still to pass a law in America that means that you cannot interrogate a minor or someone with a certain IQ level without either a lawyer or a guardian present, because that has been done plenty of times, like it was in the Dassey case.
I'm just going to go and get really low IQ score in a test. I'm going to deliberately sabotage myself, so I know it's in the US, but still. Where was I? I think I read out number 2, didn't I? So, step 3, after they've formulated the questions in a neutral way, which is easier said than done, the examiner conducts a pre-test interview to gather background information and establish a bit of rapport with the subject themselves and clarify the questions. I think a very important thing in telling whether someone's lying is understanding their mannerisms, how they actually talk normally. So talking to them in a way that's sort of friendly, where they're not incentivized to lie about things. So just like, how are you? Asking a few questions like, oh, where are you from? Getting them to talk a bit about themselves. It'll put them a bit at ease because that's a topic which they're familiar with, and therefore you can get a very clear picture of how someone acts when they're not under pressure.
Yeah, there's also 2 benefits to that. Either if they're guilty, it allows you to disarm them somewhat and make it easier to discern whether or not they're lying, or it might help them set them at ease if they're very apprehensive about taking the test because they're worried about getting a false positive because they genuinely are innocent. It might relax them a bit and not
prejudice the physiological markers that might say that they would be lying?
Well, if they are relaxed as well, the spikes on the polygraph test will become more obvious. If they're running at a higher rate, anxiety, the extent that you can see the line from the deviation, it's sometimes quite difficult to infer whether something is a spike or whether it's just an anomalous result. For example, I've taken the galvanic skin response thing, and sometimes just having like an itch on my foot would make it spike.
Do you want to tell the story you told me off air or not?
No, I didn't think you did. Basically, the skin response thing gave away
that you found the examiner quite attractive.
Yes.
Yes. There we go.
But yeah, it works to some extent. But then also, it's just like, oh, she's going to be looking at that in a minute, so I better control myself. And then all of a sudden, it was back to normal again. Yeah. So it's not exactly. That obvious sometimes, particularly if you're not looking at it at the time when it was being set up. But number 4, the subject is connected to the polygraph instruments, and baseline readings of physiological responses such as, blood pressure, heart rate, respiration are taken. And you need the baseline, obviously, to compare when they're asked questions. And you try and get an average. Quite often, this can be done in computer software now, where it calculates it for you rather than you having to eyeball it, and you can have it depending on the software that you use. This is true of a lot of neuroscientific software. If there's a significant peak from the average, what the software can do is test whether that difference is significant at a statistical level, which basically negates the probability that it's a product of chance, compared to the baseline that you've established already. So it actually can be quite objective as long as the setup is correct and you approach it in the correct way. So
no, not true, because all it takes is one thought and to hold this thrown up black in my wanders. It's not ever truly accurate.
One to win a fight, then feeling good is better.
That review from Chef Lover 27 was so right. You're buying a knife.
Okay, I must say that I'm really tired of all the woke stuff. It's very tiring.
Yes, it is.
And I would really like to live in a world where there would be no woke stuff at all. And Marjorie Taylor Greene agrees with us.
Yes.
And she started talking about the issue of national divorce again. And I want to offer my sympathetic criticism that this is not the best way to go about it.
Correct.
Okay, so before we talk more about this, why not visit our website? For only £5 a month, you can have access to all our premium content, such as the latest installment of the Symposium series that I did with Bo on patriotism. we're discussing about loving our countries, and as this being something that is good, and how it is inconsistent with particular views of what morality is supposed to be about.
Left-wing views of what morality is supposed to be about.
That try to view it as completely impartial.
Yeah.
But there are some issues with it. So you might as well check it if you want.
It's probably a good baseline to this discussion as well, right? Because this is probably going to be involving the concept of patriotism and what it is to love one's country.
Okay, so back to our segment. Some days ago, Marjorie Taylor Greene uploaded this tweet, and she writes on the thread, "Why the left and right should consider a national divorce, not a civil war, but a legal agreement to separate our ideological and political disagreements by states while maintaining our legal union. Definition of irreconcilable differences, inability to agree on most things or on important things. Tragically, I think we, the left and right, have reached irreconcilable differences. I'll speak for the right and say we're absolutely disgusted and fed up with the left cramming and forcing their ways on us and our children with no respect for our religion, faith, traditional values, and economic and government policy beliefs."
I'm glad you're here.
So I must say that I do share the sentiment of disgust. And I do share the sentiment of being tired and fed up. But I really think that national divorce is not the way. Let us examine more her positions. She appeared on Sean Hannity, and before we play the video, she said something like the following, that a national divorce can prevent a new civil war. And the national divorce would reduce the federal government and the federal debt.
Yes, it would.
Increase the state control of public education, and she's proposing for banning people who move from blue states to red states from voting for at least 5 years, because as she says, we don't want them to bring bad politics with them. Now, the thing is that I want to understand the position a bit more, because reducing the federal government is one thing. Calling for a national divorce is quite another.
Yes.
And I don't understand yet what is precisely distinctive about this proposition, because Republicans have almost always, at least that I can remember, at least since the Reagan years, called for a reduction of the federal state. So I think it's particularly problematic to phrase it in terms of a national divorce, while the legal union is maintained. But I don't know exactly how
would it work?
I don't know exactly how would it work, but my criticism won't be on this line, because I will give it to Marjorie Taylor Greene. She never said that what she proposed is supposed to be easy. Okay, so Sean Hannity asked her, how do you reconcile, on the one hand, defund the police with law and order, on the other hand, secure borders and wide open borders, and how do you reconcile, for instance, energy independence and policies such as New Green Dealism? And it seems that there is no middle ground, and this is how it sets the debate for her point to come forth, because she is arguing for irreconcilable differences. I think we should...
Before we go on though, I have to say, I can't help but notice that the irreconcilable nature of the differences seems to come primarily from the left, in which they tend to not give any ground or compromise at all.
I agree with you. Yes, so, I think to a very great extent this is the case.
Yeah, I think so.
But there's a question as to whether this is something that a society can do without. Let us play her video and we'll go to that point.
In my life, in my world, all of my friends are regular Americans. Everyone I talk to is sick and tired and fed up of being bullied by the left, abused by the left, and disrespected by the left. And our ideas, our policies, our ways of life have become so far apart that it's just coming to that point. And the last thing I ever want to see in America is a civil war. No one wants that. At least everyone I know would never want that. But it's going that direction, and we have to do something about it. We're also a nation, a crumbling nation. We're a nation in distress. Our government is in complete failure. Over $34 trillion. We are on the verge of default, and we have to do something about that. But that was the right and the left that did that to the American people on their own. But the Democrats never stop pushing their policies, their ideas, and their culture on Republicans and the right. And we are so sick and tired of it. We are tired of our children being taught ideas and ideologies in school that we do not want our children taught, like gender lies. We do not want our children having their gender changed or transitioned. We can't even have women's sports and privacy in our bathrooms, and women in prison can't even have spaces. ESG, environmental social governance, has completely taken over corporations, and this is a huge policy pressed on private businesses through the government from Democrats. If you're a white male today in the financial industry, you can forget it. You're a dinosaur. You're going extinct. No one should ever be hired by their skin color or their gender or how they identify. It should only be about your character and your ability to do the job.
For me, working smart is all about being productive and not just busy, which means finding the routines and products that help me get to my goals faster.
Out your character and your ability to do the job.
Okay, so there is much that I agree with her, but I want to say that there are also some issues with her point, at least to my mind. So the argument seems to be like this, that if a national civil war is to be avoided, we should either engage in dialogue or we should go our separate ways. We have irreconcilable differences, so we cannot engage in dialogue. That is why we should go our separate ways. There are technical difficulties with this proposal, such as the geographical difficulties. Matt Walsh did a good job, to my mind, 2 days ago when he was talking about the geographical issue, but I'm willing to assume that that could somehow be...
Technology might make it possible to overcome.
Yes, so I'm going to assume that we can separate the US in the Republican half and the Democrat half. I want to say that there are still major problems with this claim. So one thing, the first point I want to raise, which may be a bit thorny, but I think that it's actual, that it seems to me to be a political mistake that she made this statement at this moment.
Really?
Okay, because it seems to me that it inadvertently conveys pessimism about the 2024 election. Let me explain myself. I totally agree with Marjorie Taylor Greene that the woke ideology and the woke agenda is really something that is appalling. So the question, and that the federal state has grown to an extent that compromises the autonomy of each of the states. But the thing is, it seems to me that if she were optimistic about the 2024 election, she would say, let us win, we can win and we will win, and we will use the power of the federal state to offset the advance of woke agenda in blue states.
Yeah, do what Ron DeSantis has been doing.
Yes. So it seems to me that it is a political mistake that she made this statement at this moment. But I may be wrong. Now, there are some other issues with this that I don't know how effective that would be. Because it seems to me that if the problem is that there are irreconcilable differences about how a society should be run, I don't think that there is any society, any large society in history, at any time or place, that did not have such a difference of opinions.
I think that things have got much worse, and I think it's down to the fact that there is actually very little dialogue that really takes place. One thing that I find remarkable is how infrequently commentators from the left and the right, in America in particular, actually have to talk to one another. Normally it's just, honestly, normally it's the Republicans asking Democrats to come on their shows, and the Democrats refuse. And we see the same thing with the left in Britain with GB News. How dare you go on GB News? So why wouldn't you? You know, you need to have a dialogue with the opposition about the subject at hand. That's how a democracy is supposed to work.
I agree. And I do agree that especially those who are in favor of woke ideology, they do not engage in argument, and they do not care to engage in argument, because they are literally brainwashing people that disagreement constitutes an assault upon their humanity. But there is the crucial area of the gray area of the undecided voters. So it seems to me that it would be good for Republicans not to answer with division to the inherently divisive nature of the left, but to actually open a dialogue with the undecided voters and show them the left is all about division. We have something else to offer. We're not about division.
Yeah, keeping what is essentially like an open door to the left.
Yes.
Just like every day on Fox News. Well, we'd invite these two people to come into our studio and have a discussion about it. You know, we'll sit down, record it for an hour. It'd be great TV if we can get AOC and Ben Shapiro or whoever, Marjorie Taylor Greene, whoever, sit and come and talk. And then you could have the program where it just turns into an interview between the host and Marjorie Taylor Greene, because of course AOC wouldn't turn up. You know, whatever, the Democrat wouldn't turn up. Yeah. You say, well, look, that's the share we've got for the Democrat politician to come in and have the discussion, but they keep refusing the discussion. What can we do? You know, and so essentially keep this sort of pressure building where we say, look, you are refusing to have the conversations, and well, that means that we're just not going to have them with you, and so we're going to have them without you, so we only get one person's view.
I think that this policy would also be ineffective, because the major reason for the idea that for there being irreconcilable differences, at least in views of how society is to be run, I think has to do with the hierarchy that every large society involves. And it's very frequent that people on top of that hierarchy, and those in the middle and those at the bottom, they have very different views of what is in the common interest. And maybe they also disagree in how they view their own interest.
I think the main problem is that the left views their political constituency to be comprised entirely of minorities and excludes the majority. And so that makes the issue of bifurcation in the political realm really emphasized, because it was in previous eras, like we go back to like Bill Clinton, that the majority was still a part of the moral constituency they considered when they were formulating proposals. So you have Bill Clinton sounding a lot like Donald Trump if you go back and listen to his campaign speeches. Yeah. He's like, yeah, no, we're going to have a wall to prevent illegal immigrants coming across the border. But of course, the left now have said, no, actually, the only people we care about are the illegal immigrants or the trans minority or the ethnic minorities. And so the majority gets sliced out of policy-making concerns as if everything is fine and nothing needs to be done for these people. And so, I mean, what can you do?
I think we should question the idea that the woke people are the majority.
Well, I know they're not the majority, obviously. But what I mean is, if they can never be persuaded to share the concerns of the majority, what can be done?
That's a really great question. Also, another thing is that...
Well, they just stigmatize the majority.
I know, but I don't think that that going separate ways is possible, because every society has a hierarchy, and many people feel resentment for that hierarchy, and the woke character is based on resentment for a particular hierarchy. So just by cutting the country in half, the woke, let's say, evil spirit is not going to go away. The curse is not going to be lifted.
Yeah, I think one thing that the pro-national divorce types need to remember is that, okay, let's assume that you do cut America evenly in half. One side's going to start succeeding and the other side's going to start failing because of the social norms and institutions that these things build. And so when the woke side starts collapsing because you don't have people who are qualified to do the jobs that are required to uphold the institutions, and it ends up looking like San Francisco or New York or Portland, they're not going to blame themselves for these problems. They're going to say, oh look, the evil red states have sabotaged us. Look how they're prospering. Look how we're failing. They must somehow be conspiring against us. And they're essentially, I think it'll turn into a war, whether you like it or not.
Exactly, and I think this gives me if we go down this road, but I think your point gives me a good pass for the third problem, that I think this proposal underestimates an expansionism of the woke character. Because the thing is, what does Marjorie Taylor Greene want? She wants something that I want as well.
She wants isolationism.
She wants the idea of negative liberty, freedom from government interference. And with that, I'm totally with her.
Yes.
But it seems to me that there is a problem with wanting to part away with politics. And there is a saying that if you don't want to deal with politics, politics will find a way to deal with you.
Yes, Pericles.
Yes.
It's that older statement. It's so ancient and understanding that you might not be interested in politics, but politics is very interested in you.
Yes, and the question is that if you have a bully that goes and bullies you and you give them half the country, they're not going to stop.
Yeah.
They're just going to be habituated into bullying you because you're giving them the message that bullying gets you somewhere.
Yeah. It was a profitable thing. They got half a country. They keep bullying, they might get another quarter of the country.
And the quarter, if the reaction is, leave me alone, I don't want to deal with you, which is, I understand it. I share the sentiments that lead there to say this. But I still think that there is an issue with this. That's why my criticism is a sympathetic one.
You can't pay off the Vikings.
The quarter is going to become an eighth, and the eighth is going to become a 16th, and eventually the entire country is going to be back under woke influence. So I think that it communicates a message of weakness, because the idea of being sick and tired with woke culture, I get it, but we constantly have to defend our country.
It sounds like you're about to give up.
Yes.
It's encouraging to the enemy, isn't it?
Yes. I don't think we can give up, and unfortunately, it may be a sad feature of the human condition that we live in societies who have people who want their disintegration, and they really care for this. So I don't think giving them geographical regions is getting us anywhere.
I totally agree with this. I've been having this argument with Americans for a long time. It's like, look, they're like, yeah, I know, the idea of the national force is not new. She hasn't just invented this. I've had this conversation with Americans loads of times, and they're like, yeah, well, if we can just give up New York and California, we should be fine. It's like, yeah, but why would you want to? California was Republican 30 years ago, and you've lost it. New York had Rudy Giuliani 20 years ago was the mayor of New York. He was a Republican. You've lost that too. It's like, look, you can't continue to cede ground. You've got to start taking things from them.
Yes.
At some point. So you've got to formulate the argument that shows people actually, no, look, we have what is desirable. Like, how much could you be prepared to give up until, like, you personally are like, hang on a second, right, we've lost too much. One inch of America is too much to give up to these bloody communists, in my opinion.
It's conceding ground to the bullies.
Yeah, exactly.
And if you concede ground to the bullies, they are not going to stop.
No, but it's not even about them. It's about you. How ignoble is it that the Americans have lost half their country already, and they're thinking, okay, well, let's just hold on to the last half. And I say this from a position of love, my American friends. Come on, we expect better.
The thing is that the psychology of the wokery is all about misery. And misery loves company. It won't leave you. It won't leave you.
And while you still have something good, they will always look over at you with envious eyes and think, I can ruin that.
Yes.
They will always do this. You have to defeat them.
Because the wokery is inherently parasitical.
Yeah.
And another point is that I think that from a politician's perspective, there should be, and also a citizen's perspective, there should be no red and blue children or children of red and blue states.
Yeah.
So I think it is too much of a concession to say, let us divide the country in half and let the children who are born into the other half suffer under, let's say, the yoke of woke ideology. Marjorie Taylor Greene has a response that that does touch on what you said about California and New York, and she says, there is a failure for many to realize Americans are giving up because they are sick of the talking heads that just complain about all the problems and politicians that never fix anything, while the right just keeps talking, taking the beatings and abuse from the left. Yes, the red California that gave us Reagan is gone, and that was another time long ago. California is now like a weird communist country.
So just as a pause on this, I am totally sympathetic to this opening paragraph that the right just keeps taking beatings and abuse from the left. I'm totally sympathetic to him. This is why I was kind of annoyed at the reaction people had to Matt Walsh when he was like, "Look, you're not a woman. I'm a transphobe. I don't care about your opinion on this." People were like, "Oh, that's not very polite." And it's like, yeah, but being polite is what the Republicans have been doing for the last 30 years. Being impolite is what the left have been doing for the last decade at least, if not more. And look how much ground they've taken, you know.
And unfortunately, they have convinced a large portion of the undecided voters that it is, in fact, the other way around. That it is Republicans who are impolite.
Absolutely.
And supporters of the Democrat Party who are polite.
Absolutely. And it's not been to the Republicans' advantage. So you've got to stop doing it. You know, and I'm not saying go around being mean all the time. But if there's a left winger who's like, "Oh, I just want you to be sympathetic and kind to me," so, well, look, I'm happy to be, what I consider kind to you, but I don't think lying to you is kind. I'm just not going to do it. I'm actually very sympathetic to Matt Walsh's position here.
So I'll read the 3 last paragraphs of her tweet. She says, "Reducing the power and size of the federal government and giving more to the states in order to protect ourselves and our kids from the abusive left is actually the bold action that needs to be taken in order for the left to be able to realize how insane and abusive they have become. Just like the prodigal son, once the left gets to truly live in their own filth they have created without us, then they will be able to realize the error of their ways. Until then, most of us don't want to be forced to accept and live in their filthy, abusive ways with them anymore." I must say,
I like the framing.
I also like the framing, but I think that it misunderstands the woke mentality, because the woke they won't realize anything.
No, they will never accept. I tweeted something like this out the other day. I said, look,
You try and explain to one of the woke freaks with the facts in front of you, and they just stick their fingers in their ears and go la 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 la. I don't want to hear it. It's not true. It's not true. It's not true. Even though it's right in front of you from proof. All they ever do is yell and scream at the top of their lungs through their freaks. Never show any proof. Never want to even look at the actual facts.
Every failure will be considered a failure of the other, not the doctrine.
Yes. Yes.
There's no way of getting them to realize they're in error.
Yeah, they are not, because they are denying objectivity, and they are denying the idea that the world and facts can be different from their feelings, from their impressions. And when we don't think that there is something external to us, there is no room for self-improvement. So in fact, if they will, I don't doubt that that if that were the case, blue states would be destroyed by their economic policies. I don't doubt that. But
it's already happening.
But it wouldn't lead to any realization. It would just lead to extra fanaticism, extra self-victimization, extra...
While the red states exist, it will always be their fault.
Yes.
You can't change that framework from them. I expect them to experience reality. It won't work.
Yeah. So I think...
sorry, before we go on, I just want to say, I like Matt Gaetz' tweet here. America doesn't need national force. Maybe we wouldn't be talking about it if our leaders weren't cheating on us with Ukraine. That's a great frame. Because that's exactly how it feels when... I see British politicians all the time praising the Ukrainian flag. In fact, it was Emily Thornberry I saw today on TV, who famously in 2013 posted a picture of a bunch of England flags in England and was like, "Oh God, this is disgusting," and yet is crying about the Ukrainian flag being painted on the ground outside of the London Russian embassy. And it's just like, right, it does feel like they are cheating on us. That's a good way of framing it.
And I want to say that Marjorie Taylor Greene will be tonight at 8 p.m. on Tucker Carlson talking about this.
Hopefully Tucker's not in favor of the divorce.
Okay. Yes. Okay. So I think she's going to talk about Ukraine.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So I want to make a suggestion that I think that the Republicans should not answer with division to the inherent divisive nature of the left. And I want us to look at another clip, and I want to make a point after we watch this. point after we watch this. So I want to make a point with this video.
Okay, what's the point?
The point is, not everyone is like that.
Really?
These people are not the majority. Okay? And there, of course, in a way that this is obvious, but there is something extra to be said here, is that the Republicans should not try to address these people who act like that. But I think it is important to appeal to the undecided voters. And if, back to the original phrasing of the argument, going their separate ways, I don't think it's the solution. It has all these problems that we talked about. So there is room for dialogue and engaging in dialogue with the undecided voters. So I think it would be the Ron DeSantis way that you mentioned before. I think that's a good way forward.
I mean, this just seems to me to be a very confused child.
Yes. And
I wouldn't take this person seriously.
And when we show this video to, let's say, undecided voters, I think that
it's actually quite powerful.
It's quite powerful to show that these people are the minority. They're not the majority. They want to present themselves as if being the minority. And we should ask ourselves some questions, such as, to whose interest is it to think that most people are bad and ill will against us? This is what woke ideologies are trying to do. They're trying to create the impression that the default position is that every other person is bad. To whose interest is it to think that the wokery is the majority? And to whose interest is it to think that dialogue is impossible? It is in the interest of those who thrive on division and want to claim that they are on the right side of history. Why? Because they are not strong enough, and they want to appear as if they are strong enough to scare other people. So I think Republicans should not be scared and should not answer with division to the inherently divisive nature of the left.
Yeah, there's something about this clip I think is actually an instructive lesson. The man in it, I'm guessing, is a Republican. And there's a kind of implacable sort of centeredness in him.
Yes.
He's look, no, this person clearly has this child has clearly been given a brain parasite by the left, and they're so obviously they've been perverted by someone else. I mean, look at the rage. Look at just this person is someone who has had something done to them, and the guy standing in the suit going, no, I want you to look. That's what we're looking at.
Yes.
I'm just not in favor of it, you know.
Yes.
Anyway.
If you appreciated that segment from the podcast The Lotus Eaters, you can go to lotuseaters.com to get access to all the premium content we have on the site, such as the Epoch series, this one on Conquering Everest. And if you'd like to find out what else we're putting out, you can follow us on Getter at lotuseaters_com on Getter. Thank you and goodbye.
The smoker has a digital pellet sensor, and you can even adjust the heat with an app. My gut says get it. What's your opinion?
Okay. Now, I want to say that it is impressive to see how things have changed in the last decade, because normally when us conservatives would hear about student protests, we would assume that they come from the left, but I think that this has been falsified.
Oh, really?
Yes, and it is very important to see how this has been falsified, and it is sort of bitter, because we see how things have changed in schools and universities with the advance of woke ideology. But I think that when we understand this phenomenon, we will come up with good solutions, and we will climb the Mount Everest of putting things back in order. Speaking of Mount Everest, why not visit a website? Again, for £5 a month, you can have access to our premium content, and you can have access to videos such as Conquering Everest, the latest installment of the Epoch series.
This was really good. Excuse me. This was Bo. Like, Bo is very interested and knows a lot about these kind of adventure stories.
Yeah.
Where it's like, you know, some amateur British person who's like, I'm going to try and cross the Antarctic. I'm going to try and climb Mount Everest. And they know nothing really about doing these things and end up getting themselves killed halfway.
this is like Steve Irwin who's saying, there's a tiger, there's a crocodile, I'm going to hag it.
Well, that was exactly it. And when I asked why, I think it was Mallory who was just like, well, because it's there. And it's like, okay, great. I appreciate the entrepreneurial spirit. But, like, I mean, a lot of people die trying these things. But it was a fascinating conversation because Bo knows all about this. And it, like, one of those sort of unbelievable tests of human endurance is, so it was good stuff. I didn't know it, so it was really entertaining for me to watch.
I think we will also have to show endurance in dealing with ideologues.
That's the theme of this podcast, isn't it?
Yes.
Look, you just have to endure.
Okay, so on the 7th of February, this article was published. Catholic high school student arrested after suspension for opposing transgender ideology. I read from the text. A Catholic high school student in Canada was reportedly arrested Monday after being suspended for protesting against transgender people's use of bathrooms and saying there are only two genders. And now he's appealing to Ontario's Human Rights Tribunal.
Good luck with that.
Good luck.
Because, Canadian human rights law is rigged so that you will fail this.
Josh Alexander, 16, said the leadership of St. Joseph's Catholic High School in Renfrew, Ontario, told him that his continued attendance would be detrimental to the physical and mental well-being of transgender students, according to the Epoch Times. So,
wow, that's quite remarkable.
There's a problem that woke ideologues want to raise children thinking that disagreement about important issues constitutes a detrimental assault to their physical and mental well-being. These children will grow up and they will...
No, let's see. Cut the woke speak. Let's say it properly. That... It's feeling, the he, she thing. It's things. It thinks. Its feelings mean everything. Sorry your feelings got hurt, but no one cares. Grow up.
Try to manipulate people into agreeing with them. It's like people who are going to say, if you don't agree with me, so you are causing immense pain on me and you're evil. Back to the article. The high school junior tweeted that Ontario police arrested and charged him after he attempted to attend class in violation of an exclusion order following his suspension earlier this school year. Offense is obviously defined by the offended, Alexander told the Epoch Times.
Obviously.
I expressed my religious beliefs in class and it spiraled out of control. Not everybody's going to like that. That doesn't make me into a bully. It doesn't mean I'm harassing anybody. They express their beliefs and I express mine. Mine obviously don't fit the narrative. I want to say that bullies are those who do not engage in dialogue typically.
Generally, that's how bullying works.
Yeah, you don't have a bullying saying, oh, give me an argument why I shouldn't bully you. Yeah, so unfortunately, woke education teaches children to become bullies.
Yeah.
Alexander, who described himself as a born-again Christian and led student action in support of last year's tracker convoy, reportedly has not been to school since he was first suspended in November. He was hit with a suspension for allegedly organizing protests at his school against biological males in girls' bathrooms and arguing in class that God created two unchangeable genders. Multiple students, including trans students, were kind of shouting me down, the student told the Epoch Times of the classroom exchange.
So if there's a gang of transgender students screaming at him, can't he say, well, their presence here is making my physical and mental well-being, putting that into question?
I think reason says this, but reason. When we're talking about irrational spaces...
what we're talking about is power here.
Yeah.
Look at how the blade cuts.
Yes, it's a double standard.
Yeah.
And we're used to many of them.
Yes.
Alexander said he was told by his principal that he was allowed to return to school only if he stopped using the dead name or given name of transgender students and excluded himself from classes with two transgender students who objected to his religious views about gender.
Why should it not be the other way around? Sorry, I want those two transgender students excluded from classes because they are putting me in an awkward position by making me try to say things that are harmful to me. What?
They're trying to make me mess up proper English. I will not bastardize my speech. Get rid of them or have them to speak properly. Yeah, I'm in agreement with that. Be a grown-up. Be a real adult. Don't cater to these little children.
Why should it be that way?
Accepting one's preferred pronouns now is a prerequisite for being allowed to enter a school.
Yeah, it's unbelievable.
So even though it was lifted in January, Alexander's suspension has effectively continued after the Renfrew County Catholic District School Board excluded him for the rest of the school year, according to his legal counsel at Liberty Coalition Canada. Alexander remains unsure whether the technically non-disciplinary action will continue into next year. Alexander's lawyer, James Kitchen, said the school has accused his client of bullying transgender students.
Right, believe our nonsense or you're bullying us.
Obviously, he doesn't actually bully them, as that term would be defined by reasonable people, Kitchen told the Epoch Times. He's not going to seek them out and call them names and make fun of them, but he does express his views about what these people say and about what they believe and about what they are doing.
Well, they argue something, and he says, well, my beliefs contradict that, and they say, well, you're a bully.
And this is how democratic they are and how they can handle dialogue. And he expresses them online, and he expresses them in the class. Later this month, Alexander plans to appeal his original suspension to the Provincial Human Rights Tribunal, which would bring his case before a school board panel. The appeal has reportedly hit a technical snag regarding whether Alexander is independent of his parents. The principal of St. Joseph's Catholic High School told Fox News Digital he was prohibited under Canadian law from commenting on the ongoing case. Now, let us watch the next video. You can see here he gets arrested.
What's he being arrested for?
Because he went back to school,
right,
and he was not supposed to. And we are playing it on mute because there are some songs that are heard, but the irony here, and this is trolling, that there are many people who manically shout, yeah, and they play We Are Family by Sister Sledge. And I think that's next level trolling because, there are people who really think that the institution of the nuclear family is oppressive. And they have, I thought that I should mention it. Now, next video we hear Josh Alexander's version of the event.
Very quickly, I was informed by female students that male students were using the female washrooms. This is an issue that came up in the class debate, and I used that platform to share my opinions, as every other student had the opportunity to do. And I quoted some scripture. I said that there's only two genders, and apparently because there was transgender students in those classes, that was considered bullying. And I went beyond the classroom, and I took it to the office, and I said, okay, this is an issue. There's female students that are uncomfortable. Something needs to be done. And I was ignored. A female student made the same complaint I did, and they ignored her as well. So at that point, I decided to organize a protest outside my school. And 2 days before the protest, they suspended me indefinitely. And then they permanently banned me from 2 of my classes. When I attended those classes, they suspended me again and then excluded me twice. And at the end of the semester, on the first day of the new semester, I decided to return to school and try to recover my credits and actually get an education. They arrested me.
It's weird to look at the difference. It's
important
instructive to look at the difference between the coverage of this event. He's talking about something that could be a bottom-up movement. Many students being really dissatisfied with woke ideology. And it's not about himself alone. It's not just a person expressing his views. He's also talking about his classmates and girls who told him that we feel particularly unhappy with this. And I think that this is really weird because this shows that we have the majority of the population that does not like woke ideology, but we have woke ideologues intentionally trying to portray this as being an isolated event that does not reflect the majority of the population.
And why shouldn't the majority have their views considered? Why does it have to be? And this goes back to the irreconcilable differences in the first part of the national force. Okay, in democracy, I thought it was a majoritarian society that got to dictate, because otherwise it takes on this aristocratic view where you've got the two transgender people and now the entire society or the entire class has to be silent. It's not very democratic, you know, and any dissenters get expelled and arrested.
It is not at all, and people who can handle dialogues, they literally cannot talk about themselves as Democrats. Now, I'm not saying that there are no problems with this form of governance, especially the direct democracy we had in classical Athens. I think that's very weird form of organization. Yeah. I'm much more in favor of a liberal constitutional democracy, although I do know that it has its problems and it receives lots of criticisms and it needs to be supplanted by other stuff. So one thing, let us go to the next video.
I hear the guy wrote Darkness at Noon, Arthur Kessler.
Brilliant. Sorry, we're missing the next video. Do you want to just give me a quick description of what the next video is?
Yeah, I'll say that there was a clip that appeared on Liz Willis' Twitter feed, and she had a teacher saying, "We have advanced degrees, what do parents have?"
I saw this, yeah, I did see this. Oh, here we go.
Yeah.
We put a lot of meaning in a signature. It signifies the start.
I did see this. Oh, here we go.
Yeah. Yes, so basically...
I have a master's degree because when I got certified, I was told I had to have a master's degree to be an Arizona certified teacher. We all have advanced degrees. What do the parents have? Are we vetting the backgrounds of our parents? Are we allowing the parents to choose the curriculum and the books that our children are going to read? I think that it's a mistake. I'm just speaking from the heart. The one line that I love is, we must remember that the purpose of public education is not to teach only what parents want their children to be taught. It is to teach them what society needs them to be taught.
Did you hear that? They all want you to be a comrade. Socialism.
I really had a sense you like
when
this
I
video.
got certified, I was told...
But yeah, that's absolutely fascinating. The arrogance of this. It's like, what do parents have? Well, they have direct knowledge of what children are like, actually. They live with them all day, every day. And they actually care about the children, not about society as an abstract concept.
They know much better what is in the interest of children than parents.
Yes.
I want to say two things about that video. Is that, in a way, yes, I mean, this person may have an expertise on a particular subject, but we're not talking about parents going to a mathematician and trying to tell him or her how to teach mathematics. We are talking about some more basic stuff, like
we're talking about things that might not even be able to be communicated through technical language, right? This is Oakeshot's practical and technical distinction playing out. What do they have? Well, they have the practical knowledge of what is actually good for the children on the day-to-day basis.
Yes, and it's particularly irritating to me to hear when this teacher talks about we must remember that the purpose of public education is not to teach only what parents want their children to be taught. It is to teach them what society needs them to be taught. In a way, yes, exactly. Society needs people who care about law and order, not people who look at the law as being inherently oppressive and want society to be destroyed.
But there's so much in this. It's like, okay, well, you know, where in society does it decree that we have to abolish gender? Why does society need that? Does that have any downside? So in fact, society maybe doesn't need the abolition of gender.
And society needs also goodwill, and this is what woke ideology tries to destroy, because it tries to create the sentiment in us that the majority of the population is bad, and we should look at each other as enemies.
Yeah, and the most marginalized person is the most privileged in this viewpoint. they get all of the consideration. So I don't see why they should.
And we could say that in order to somehow try to find, let's say, try to negotiate our differences, society does require a kind of dialogue, and you have to raise people who can handle dialogue and do not look at disagreement as being an assault on their humanity. You're not helping them, you're not helping society this way. And I want to say that there is, unfortunately, this is not just an issue at schools, it is also an issue at universities. And I was looking at a later video on trigonometry, someone called Dr. Paul Taylor who appeared, and I think there is a minute that I think we should show that I think he hits the right nail on the head.
Okay.
You know the guy who wrote Darkness at Noon, Arthur Kessler? It's a brilliant book about being imprisoned in a totalitarian. It's a novel. But he did this very funny little short article where I think he called it The Commissars and the Yogi. He said people are divided into two types. The yogi is the spiritualist dreamer, and the commissar, you'll know them from, you'll know Constantine. But if you've ever had any engagement with any bureaucracy, you know what a commissar is. He's the person with the clipboard and the power. And the universities have created these institutions within the university where you don't have to be that good. You can climb the greasy pole by being a commissar, by enforcing language codes. And guess what? You set up a language code unit. I think Leeds has now got some harassment unit, so good job I left. But, and guess what? When you have a unit devoted to finding harassment, you'll know this from the Soviet example, guess what? An awful lot of harassment is found because they have to justify their own existence.
So we have institutions within institutions. We have the rise of a bureaucracy that is actually charged with it literally tries to, it is formed by people who are not good enough to stand out in academia by their own work, and they actually throw mud at others who are better than them, because they want to say, okay, if we have 30 people and one person can get the job, and we have 15 people who think that I'm not good enough, they are gonna say, but those other 15 who are better than us, they are all the bad things in the world.
It's a naked power grab.
Yes.
That's the problem.
And we have people who try to perpetuate the positions, and they try to basically justify their salary. And it's an easy way to constantly try and find a problem. If your job is to detect problems, you're going to make problems in order to show how you are worth your salary.
Well, this is very much Peterson's distinction between hierarchies of competence and hierarchies of dominance, right? Because the woke left are just demonstrating that they operate a hierarchy of dominance rather than the hierarchy of competence.
Yes. And I think that this is particularly problematic, but one way to combat this phenomenon is to combat this precise bureaucracy. And I think that this is a political problem. It's a problem that requires a state solution.
There are going to be people who don't like that.
I know, but I don't know if there is another solution. I really want to hear about it, and I'm really ready to be convinced, because I would also require, I would also like there to not be something like that.
No, I agree. I don't think Ron DeSantis is doing anything wrong, frankly. Legislate them out of the institutions.
If you appreciated that segment from the podcast The Lotus Eaters, you can go to lotuseaters.com to get access to all the premium content that's on the site, such as the Symposium series, the most recent episode on Carl Schmitt's anti-liberalism. If you'd like to find out what else is being put out, you can follow on Getter at lotuseaters_com on Getter. Thank you and goodbye.